Hello, everyone. Welcome to the training session. We've just started the webinar just a moment or two early since we have lots of you in the waiting room eager to get started. So we'll just be getting going in a moment or two time. But in the meantime, please feel free to introduce yourselves and say hello in the chat and let us know where in the world or which organization you're joining from. And we'll be getting started in just a moment. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll be with you in a moment or two's time. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to those who've just joined us in the session. Great to have you here with us. Feel free to keep introducing yourselves in the chat as you're doing so at the moment. Great to see everyone's locations or organizations that they're coming to us from today. But in the interest of time, I think we'll be kicking off the session now. So a big welcome again to this half day of training on applying the IFRS sustainability disclosure standards. This program is a really collaborative effort driven by that demand we're seeing from the market for more support to implement the ISSB disclosure standards. And in particular, of course, today we're going to be focusing on the banking sector perspective. So great to have so many of you with an interest in that sector joining us too. Before I get started from the UNSSE side, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all of the organisations that are partnering today on this training session. So to the IFRS Foundation, to the IFC team, including the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network and the Alliance for Green Commercial Banks, and also the team at UNEP FI as well. So firstly, a big thank you to all of our supporting organisations and co-hosts today. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us at today's training session. We know it's a long time to take out of your day, and we're really grateful for the commitment that you're making today to your advancement on this topic and supporting us here. So to get us started in today's training, I'm very pleased that we have some welcoming remarks from a number of colleagues. So firstly, I'm very pleased to introduce Carlos Serrano, who is the head of the Alliance for Green Commercial Banks based in Hong Kong with the IFC team. So many thanks for joining us today, Carlos, and I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and good morning to everyone. It's a great pleasure to me to join today on behalf of the IFC Alliance for Green Commercial Banks. Let me begin by expressing our appreciation to the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges for leading this important initiative in collaboration with UNEP FI, with IFC Beyond the Balance Sheet Program, the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network, and the IFC Alliance for Green Commercial Banks. These partnerships truly demonstrate the power of collaboration, as you say, how institutions with shared missions and complementary strengths can mobilize knowledge, commitment, and action at scale. The strong participation in today's workshop is proof of that collective energy and of the growing momentum behind sustainable finance. The Alliance for Green Commercial Banks is a global accelerator of green banking in emerging markets, designed and managed by the International Finance Corporation, IFC, a member of the World Bank Group. It operates as a curated by invitation membership platform, uniting commercial banks in emerging markets with leading global financial institutions and industry experts to accelerate green finance where it's needed most. Through peer-to-peer learning, thought leadership, and community building, the Alliance helps financial institutions integrate sustainability into their core business and build pipelines of green assets that the Alliance will help finance alongside global institutional investors. Its first regional chapter was launched in Asia in partnership with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and with the Bank of China, Hong Kong, Citi, Credit Agricole, Corporate Investment Banking, HSBC, and Standard Chartered as our cornerstone banks. Since launching membership just 18 months ago, we have onboarded 23 banks from Southeast Asia and China working collaboratively for better banking for people and for the planet. Alongside the Alliance, IFC flagship Beyond the Balance Sheet program is helping banks also and regulators in emerging markets to strengthen their sustainability reporting. Through its online platform and practical tools, the program has supported over 40,000 participants in more than 100 markets, empowering financial institutions to embed sustainability into governance, strategy, risk management, and performance. Today's session on the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standard S1 and S2 comes at a pivotal time. These standards establish a global baseline for sustainability-related financial disclosure, enabling comparability, consistency, and confidence in sustainability data. For banks, this is not just about compliance. It's about strategic risk management, transparency, and trust. It is about strengthening our capacity to attract sustainable capital and manage climate risk and opportunities more effectively. In many emerging markets, the absence of consistent and credible data has long been a barrier to green investment. Building capacity around IFRS S1 and S2 helps close that gap, unlocking capital flows, enhancing resilience, and embedding sustainability into mainstream finance. As partners in this joint effort, the Alliance for Green Commercial Bank is proud to support today's workshop. I encourage all participants to engage actively, share experience, and make the most of these learning opportunities. Together, through collaboration and shared purpose, we can turn better disclosure into better decisions and better decisions into lasting impact. Thank you very much, and back to you, Fiona.
Thanks very much for that, Carlos, and lovely words to end on there. I think a great ethos for us to carry through today's training. So many thanks for that introduction, and great to hear all about the work your team are doing. Excellent, thank you so much. So I'm also very pleased to introduce my colleague Arjun Mahalingam from the UNEP FI Risk Centre. So Arjun and his team play a pivotal role in the training that we're delivering today, and it's a great partnership that we have together on that. So many thanks for joining us, Arjun, and I'll introduce you just to say a little bit about the work that you're doing as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone. Good to see you. I've got some slides to show you, but before that, I wanted to welcome everyone to this training session. And also thanks, Carlos. You made a lot of interesting points, which is one of the reasons why we focus on disclosures, particularly with the work of the Risk Center. Let me talk to you about what the Risk Center is and what is the objective, and talk to you about the work that we've done so far, and give you a context in terms of how disclosures fit in. So the UNEP FI Risk Center was founded in 2024, which is in its current form. And it's a center of excellence within UNEP FI, and we convene research groups, which is both aimed at building capacity, but also building out some of the key skills that is required on a range of issues, not just related to climate, but broader sustainability issues. And we also produce technical resources, primarily aimed at financial risk professionals, but also sustainability managers. And the key objective of the Risk Center is to help financial institutions adopt a systemic and a systematic approach to fully integrate sustainability considerations within their existing risk management frameworks and processes. And we think of sustainability as a unified piece, although we recognize that there is a lot of individual work going on in different organizations, which focuses on the range of themes within sustainability. So we do focus on climate. We also work on nature, but also social and other sustainability issues. In the past, we've done a lot of work on climate, and I can talk to you about in a couple of minutes. But we're also expanding it to other sustainability themes, as I mentioned. And why sustainability is important for finance is a key thing that we looked at. And as you know, sustainability drivers are transversal risk drivers, which means it affects your traditional risk types. So for example, you can think of sustainability issues like climate physical risk, climate transition risk, nature physical risk, etc. Affects credit risk, market risk, liquidity risks, so on and so forth. So it is a transversal risk driver. So we are trying to make the strong links between sustainability themes to the traditional risk themes. And we're also very keen to help participants and financial institutions develop forward-looking risk monitoring capabilities, and also help them to be ahead of the regulatory requirements that you've seen develop around the world. And it's not just about risks. Risks and opportunities are two different parts of the same coin. So we do look at opportunities as well. And it's about identifying robust risk management practices, but also helping identifying opportunities early. And ultimately, we're all in the same cause. We're always supporting sustainable development, which is one of the key objectives of the United Nations. And that is one of the reasons we're also doing sustainability risk management within the UNEP FI Risk Center. This year, we've published a range of reports. We've published 3 reports and a dashboard. So the 3 reports are one on the climate credit risk methodologies. We've also done a report on sustainability disclosures, which is very much focusing on climate-related case studies. And we've also published a report on climate stress testing methodologies. And these are already available on the website, and you can see a link on the slides when you have them. And you can directly access them, and it's free to download. Additionally, we've also published a dashboard, which is a compilation of a range of tools that is available, both open source and commercial, that can help you apply some of the knowledge and the thinking that exists out there, particularly on climate and other sustainability-related risk management. And today's focus will be largely on disclosures, and we've got a report on that. And Jan, who is going to be leading from our side today as the disclosures expert, has been working on it, and she can tell you a bit more later. Finally, in terms of what is to come, we've got 5 different projects that's being kicked off. 3 of them have already been kicked off. And one of them is on disclosures, which again, Jan is leading on. And the focus of this is largely based on the work that the IFRS Foundation has done, particularly on the ISSP standards, but also looking at broader general disclosure requirements beyond just the IFRS. But a lot of the focus is on ensuring that we do disclosures right, and you're about to hear a lot more about that today. And we also have, as I mentioned, work not just on climate disclosures, but also working on physical nature risks, climate transition plans, climate adaptation, and the broader theme on risk integration. So we're trying to bring it together into a coherent package so that you as participants can go and apply them in real world using the tools and the guidance and the resources that we would be developing. And one of the key things we're additionally working on is on the sustainability risk integration framework, which is about a practical risk-oriented approach, which brings together all of these findings and insights into something coherent and something you can directly apply within your organizations, particularly to enhance your risk management processes. So there's a lot of exciting things we're doing. And if you're really interested, please do check out the website. But if you'd like to ask any questions to us, please do email us on the email link on the slide. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Fiona. And thanks very much, everyone, for joining today and for your attention.
Great. Thanks so much, Arjun. Fantastic to hear about all the great work the team at the Risk Centre are doing. And I know those reports, I'm sure, will be very helpful for attendees. We'll come on to in a moment, actually, how to access the slides, everyone. So if you're wondering about that question, don't worry, we can explain more. But thank you again, Arjun, for setting the scene very well there as well. Fantastic. So from my side now, I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of the practicalities of how the training session will work and who's going to be presenting today before we get into the content. So firstly, just a few housekeeping points. You've probably noticed by now during our opening remarks that you're muted as participants, but that doesn't mean, of course, that we don't want you to engage and ask your questions and comment throughout the session. So it's great to see many of you already making use of those tools. So just to clarify, it's great if you have a particular question for the team to please make sure that you put that into the Q&A box. As you can see, the chat can be quite busy when we have lots of attendees, so it's easy to miss the questions if they're there. So make sure to use the Q&A box in particular for any questions, but we'd love to have your questions, so please do continue to ask those during the session. And then feel free to use the chat, as many of you are doing already, to make any general comments as we move through the session as well. We'll also be sharing a number of resources as we move through the session in the chat, so keep an eye out there for some links that you might want to follow too. So in terms of how our session will work today, so we have 3.5 hours of live training together with an optional follow-on homework activity as well. As I've said already, there's going to be live opportunity to ask your questions throughout the session, so make sure to take advantage of that opportunity to write in with your questions in the Q&A box. We've got a lot of representatives of the different organisations with lots of expertise here, so they'll be doing their best to help you answer those throughout the session. We do really encourage and ask for your participation in the session as well. So we're going to be doing a number of different types of interactive exercise today, including using Mentimeter and the polls in Zoom as well. So do make sure to take part in those as well during the training. And finally, if you join us for the full live training today, you're also able to receive a CPD certified completion certificate. To get your certificate, you'll need to fill out a feedback survey, which we're going to share with you at the end of the session. So keep an eye out for those instructions when we get to the end of the training. So just to say a little bit about who's going to be delivering the training today. So firstly, I'm Fiona from the UNSSC team, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lois Guthrie, our senior specialist. Hi, Lois. And alongside us today, as Arjun's already mentioned, we're very pleased to be joined by Yang Cheng, who is a climate risk specialist within the UNEP FI Risk Centre team. So great to have Jan with us today. He's going to really help us to unpack the finance sector specifics of these standards and disclosure requirements. And I'm very pleased as well to be joined by my colleagues at the IFRS Foundation within the Sustainability Capacity Building team. So firstly, we have Robert Swiatowski and we also have Vanessa Hay as well. So a big thank you to our colleagues at IFRS for joining us as well. And then if that wasn't enough expertise for one session, I'm very pleased as well that we have a number of representatives from the IFC who'll be available in the chat and Q&A. Should you have any questions that relate to IFC's work in particular, thank you Vladimir and Jana for both joining us. Vladimir is based within the IFC's integrated ESG advisory team in Serbia, and Jana is a sustainable finance advisor working within the Sustainable Banking and Finance Network team. So thank you both for your support as well. Okay, so with that, I'll give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering in the training today. So we've got 3 key learning objectives that we hope to help you take away from today's session. So firstly, to understand the ISSB standards. Secondly, to identify how you can use the ISSB standards. And finally, to identify the steps that you can take to develop a disclosure plan to apply the ISSB standards. So those are the 3 key things we're hoping that you'll be able to take away from today's training session. And to help us achieve that, we've developed a 4-module structure that you'll see on the screen here to work through each of these areas in sequence. So our first module, Prepare, will be all around building on existing knowledge that you might have of sustainability reporting, thinking about its purpose and the landscape of reporting standards that's led to the ISSB's global baseline. Then we're going to move into Align. And so this is all around setting the direction, thinking about how you can apply and use the standards and what additional disclosures you might need to add relative to other reporting requirements as well. And that then brings us into Implement. So this module is all around the practices and systems that you'll need to put in place to identify, evaluate, and integrate sustainability risks and opportunities into your organization's processes. And then finally, we'll finish off with Communicate. So this is all around the final format for your reporting, thinking about where to put your reporting, the timing of when to disclose it, and how to do so with efficiency and in providing confidence to your stakeholders as well. And just to show that in another way, this is how our agenda for the training breaks down across the time we have together today. And you'll be pleased to see we do take a short break in the middle of the session as well. So just to mention, as I've said, how to access the training materials from today. So we'll be sharing a number of links throughout the session today in the chat, so keep an eye on those. But our first link that we'd like to share with you, which my colleague Lois will be posting, is to the page, the event page for today's session. And here you can download the slide presentation handout, including all of the links to the resources that we're going to be sharing with you during today's session. So encourage you to take a look at that page and to find the handout. So just keep an eye out for that chat message in a moment. You'll also find on that page as well the homework exercise, which is another optional thing that you can do in follow-on, and I'll explain a bit more about that later. Just to mention as well, we also have the SSE's toolkit of guidance and resources, which goes into further detail on these 4 areas we're going to be discussing today, and is something we recommend you take use of as well. So you can follow that QR code or take a look in the handout for more information on that. Okay, but to get us started on the interactive side of things, we'd like to do our first quick Menti exercise together. So this will be our way throughout the session to do a number of interactive discussions. So recommend that you find your way into Menti now, and we'll come back to that a number of times during the session. So Lois will just shortly share with you the link to access the Menti, and that will be the easiest way to go straight into the exercise that we're doing together. So I'll let Lois share that link with you, and I will also share my screen, which does provide a number of other ways that you can join us too. There we go. So there's the link to access Menti. If you follow that link, that should take you straight to our first question. If for any reason you have any trouble following that link, however, you've got two more options. You can use that QR code that you'll see at the bottom of my screen now, and you can also go directly to menti.com and enter that 8-number code that you see in the black box at the top of the screen. But the easiest thing probably to click that link that Lois has shared. So our first question is just to ask you quickly, in your own words, why you've joined us in today's training session. So I'm seeing knowledge coming up already, capacity building, decision making, governance, blowback, that's an interesting one. Sustainability, influence, keeping up to date, maybe a refresher for those of you that already have some knowledge here. Great, lots of good words and a good test that we can all access Menti. So that's great to see as well. Thanks everyone for sharing. Okay, and then we're keeping these ones quick fire at the start, but our second warm-up question for you is just to get a sense of how much you might already know about the different areas that we're hoping to cover today together. So firstly, on explaining to the team, your team members, what ISSB is. Secondly, on using the ISSB standards, and finally, on developing a sustainability reporting strategy. So you can use that sliding scale that you've got there to let us know from maybe just getting started on maybe at the basic point to maybe very comfortable or familiar already on the right-hand side, where you're feeling in terms of your understanding and knowledge on these areas already. So it looks like we've got a little bit of a mix overall, but on average, we're coming out somewhere on the sort of lower to middle end of comfort and understanding so far, which I think is a good place to be joining us from today, and hopefully is something we can support you in moving up that scale in our session today. Brilliant, thanks everyone. So I'd recommend to keep Menti open in the background, as we'll come back to that same link later in the session, but I'll just take us back into the slide presentation now. Brilliant. Thanks everyone for the warm-up exercise there. So I'll get us started now with a little bit of an overview and a few slides before Jan will also be giving us some more of an overview in our first section. But before I do, a quick disclaimer that I'll just leave on the screen to share with you for a moment. And this is really just to be clear about how we're going to be using examples in today's training. These are really simply here to help add some colour to what we're talking about. We know that sometimes seeing a real example can help to put into practice what we're discussing, but examples shouldn't necessarily be seen as the best or the right way to do this because, of course, each company's circumstances are unique and you'll need to approach this in the way that's right for your organisation. Okay, so with that established, we'll get started now on Module 1, which, as I've said, is all around building a solid foundation of knowledge. So this is thinking about how you can build on what you already know. So maybe existing disclosures that you might have made in the past or your knowledge of the different frameworks that are out there. So here we'll be covering 3 key things. So we'll be starting with the purpose of sustainability reporting, then moving into a look at the disclosure landscape and how it's becoming simplified. And then finally, we'll finish up with introducing the global baseline. That's the core requirements and concepts in the IFRS S1 and S2 standards. To get us started on this, we're going to kick off with purpose and think about what some of the different business cases and market drivers are for sustainability disclosure. So firstly, it'll be great to get your view on that and to hear from you all as to what your key drivers are. So that brings us to our first poll question. So we've got here a number of different reasons why you might be disclosing sustainability related information or maybe thinking about disclosure as well. So if you can let us know as many of these options as are applicable for you, that would be great. So we've got regulatory expectations, sharing your management's objective, societal expectations, investor interest. Maybe there's other reasons we've missed, so feel free to share those in the chat. Or maybe you're just getting started with disclosure here and you haven't really thought about that yet, and that's absolutely fine as well. So I'll give everyone just another 10 seconds or so to respond to the polls. We've got a number of these throughout the session, so don't worry if you miss this one, we'll have lots more opportunities. But I'll just give you all a couple more seconds to respond to that. Okay, I see over half of us have taken part. So let's end the poll there and share those results. So it looks like it's fairly even, but overall we're seeing regulatory drivers as coming out as the top reason for disclosure or focusing on disclosure, and investor interest perhaps a close second. But a number of you also highlighting that maybe sharing your own organization's approach or the societal peer expectations also being valid drivers for you as well. So great to understand that, and good context to set the session going for us. So that's just a look at a few possible drivers, and interesting to see which ones are most relevant to you. But I'll be pleased now to hand over to Jan, who's going to take us through a little bit of an overview from the UNEP FI side on a few points that are relevant to highlight here. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Fiona. So now I'm going to kickstart Module 1 by going through first a very brief introduction of what climate risks are. So a lot of frameworks and standards would classify them into two main categories. On the left-hand side, we have physical risks, which arise from physical hazards or impacts resulting from climate change. And within this particular category of risk, we have also two subcategories. So chronic ones would be the category of risk that are often longer term changes, for example, rising sea levels. And on the other hand, we also have acute physical risk that are extreme short-term events that climate change is intensifying. Examples would include heat waves and floods. And secondly, on the right-hand side, we have what we call transition risks. Excuse me. These come from economic shift towards a low carbon economy and disruption that can happen along the way. And that would include mismatches between today's financial systems and the systems that we will need in order to reach net zero by drastically, for example, cutting emissions. And there are a few categories of transition risk, as we can see here, including policy risk, which would arise from tighter government controls on, for example, through introducing carbon taxes or emission caps for certain industries. Then we also have technology risk that can arise from technological changes, can replace carbon-intensive technologies or processes with low carbon options. An example here would be solar energy becoming more affordable. It can then replace fossil fuel powered assets. And then we also have market risk that refer to the shifting demand or consumer preferences for less carbon intensive products and commodities. And not mentioned here, but also important to note, is reputational risk, which refer to the potential damage to a company's brand or reputation due to their failure or lack of action to address the climate-related risks. Then I'll go to the next slide here. So this slide shows the impact that climate change could bring to the global economy. So in a worst case scenario, we can see that 18% of the global GDP could be at risk if we reach a 3.2 degrees Celsius scenario where no mitigating action is taken. And the recent report published by the National Bureau of Economic Research from the US also reveals that climate change could cost the world 12% in GDP losses for every 1 degree Celsius of warming. Moving on to the next slide here. So with the previous slide, we get an idea that the severity of climate change impact, how it's looking like. And this makes taking actions or precautious measures a logical way out, because this is something that we need to address. And there are two major ways of how these precautious measures can be done. And both of these present interesting climate finance opportunities that we can consider investing our time and resources in. And hence, through mitigation and adaptation here, there can be climate-related opportunities. So on one hand, one kind of precautious measures would focus on mitigation, which refers to preventive actions to decarbonize, to avoid or to minimize the impacts of climate change. So, for example, switching to more sustainable ways of transportation, energy production, more with higher energy efficiency, way of producing things. And on the other hand, we also have adaptation, which refers to actions in response to the negative impacts of climate change. In other words, actions that can reduce our vulnerabilities to climate change's impact. Examples would include installation of flood protection infrastructure so that when physical hazards like floods occur or rising sea levels, we can be more well positioned to respond. But some measures such as education or water conservation can sit between mitigation and adaptation, so they can contribute to both avoiding or minimizing and also adapting to climate change's impact. So we've talked about climate risk and opportunities, and that it is relevant for financial institutions and other companies to consider these risks and opportunities, especially given the financial impact that they can have. So the case for strategic planning, risk management, and resilience building is clear. This means companies, including banks, should look into how climate change drives both risk and opportunities and how that can lead to the financial impact on our income, liquidity, and changes in the balance sheet. And it's apparent that we need to act, we need to respond to the challenges that climate change can bring to us so that we can, for example, we need to decarbonize, we need to build resilience against climate change, but because climate change is a major risk driver on many fronts. And this is why we can leverage sustainability-related disclosure standards such as IFRS S1 and S2 to really help us identify the risk and opportunities from climate change so that we can better manage them. So this slide here just summarizes some of the benefits of doing sustainability-related reporting. I wouldn't go through all the points here, but basically doing disclosures helps us with regulatory compliance, holistic risk management that leads us to identifying key risk exposures and ways to address them, which can lead to the identification of opportunities as well, which can then contribute to building competitive advantage and resilience building. So all of that work towards building client and investor confidence. So with that, I will hand over to Lois from the SSE to walk us through the next section.
Thank you very much, Jan. So as Jan and Fiona have explained, we now know why sustainability disclosure is important for addressing the risks that Jan has explained and enhancing regulation. Now we're going to look briefly at how and why sustainability-related financial disclosure evolve. But before we do, we're just going to ask you which frameworks you're currently using for sustainability disclosure. Please, in the Zoom, respond by telling us any and all of the frameworks that you're currently using. Are you using the Global Reporting Initiative standards, the Integrated Reporting Framework, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board standards, the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, regional standards such as the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or others? Please tell us about those in the chat. I'll give you a few moments to think about that. Thank you to those telling us in the chat as well. We've got good participation, so I'll end the poll and share the results with you. And we can see that there's a mix here. The majority are using GRI standards, followed by SASB and TCFD, some telling us they're not using any. We can see in the chat a good mix as well. One organisation being an early adopter of S1 and S2 we'll be talking about today. Some referring to BRSR and to UNEP FI's resources. So thank you for telling us about the mix of frameworks that you're currently using. Let's go on to look at the IFRS Foundation and its structure, because that is the organisation that has developed the standards we're talking about today. And the IFRS Foundation is a not-for-profit public interest organisation that was established to develop high-quality, understandable, enforceable, and globally accepted accounting and sustainability disclosure standards. At the bottom of the screen, you can see that the Foundation hosts two independent standard setting boards. The International Accounting Standards Board, or IASB, was formed in 2001 to develop financial reporting standards, and these are in place in over 140 jurisdictions around the world. The sister organisation, the International Sustainability Standards Board, was formed in 2021 following strong market demand for sustainability standards, the first two of which we'll be talking about today were released in 2023. Governance of the standard setting boards is provided by trustees, and they in turn are accountable to a monitoring board of public authorities. So you can see that having the ISSB and IASB in the same organisation means that they can work closely together and ensure that their standards complement each other. So how did all this happen? How did these standards evolve? Well, you'll recognize a lot of the logos on this screen, and they are logos of organizations, some of the organizations at least, that have contributed to the evolution of sustainability reporting. This picture is sometimes described as a confusing alphabet soup, but actually the organizations have a lot in common, but sometimes their objectives and guidelines differ. But the main thing to take from this slide, looking at the arrows that all point to the IFRS Foundation, is that this is a picture of harmonization and simplification. So on the left of the screen, the Transition Plan Task Force work insofar as it relates to disclosure has now been incorporated into the IFRS Foundation. They are responsible for that work. The TCFD has culminated its work, and its work has been adopted into the IFRS standards, which are based on the TCFD recommendations. Three organisations at the bottom of the screen, CDSB, the Integrated Reporting Council, and SASB, were consolidated into the IFRS Foundation at the outset. CDP has aligned its climate questionnaire with S2, and GRI and the ISSB have a memorandum of understanding and work closely together to jointly identify and align common disclosures. So really a harmonizing and simplifying picture that we see here. So let's just ask you a question now, please, participants. Given what we've just said, is this true or false? Companies that disclose using the TCFD recommendations automatically comply with the ISSB standards. Is this true or false? Thank you all for participating. This is great. We've got a good level of participation now, so I'm going to share the results with you. You can see that 55% said false and 45% said true, so there's a little bit of uncertainty here, but in fact the correct answer is false. You cannot assume that if you use the TCFD recommendations, you automatically comply with the ISSB standards, although you will be a good way towards complying with the ISSB standards. Let's look at why now in the next slide. So sorry, we're just losing the slides here a little bit. I'll just explain to you that the TCFD has issued and ISSB, they issued a joint document explaining that the differences between TCFD and ISSB are actually quite limited. In some cases, S2 uses different wording to capture the same information, so it's just a wording difference. In other cases, S2 requires more detailed information than the TCFD did, and an example would be they ask for more information about use of carbon credits to satisfy GHG emission reduction targets. And finally, S2 has some additional requirements and guidance, and that would be, for example, the use of sector-specific guidance, which we'll come on to discuss later. If you're interested in this, you'll find there's a comparison document in the link there. So the ISSB's main objective has been to set a global baseline for sustainability disclosure that is a common language that enables comparable and consistent sustainability disclosures across global capital markets. And the Foundation is working with jurisdictions around the world and others in order to achieve this. The standards therefore set this common language, but of course there may be jurisdiction-specific requirements that companies are required to respond to, and companies may want to or have to provide information for broader multi-stakeholder information needs. And therefore, the standards allow for companies to provide additional information described here as building blocks on top of the global baseline if required to do so in a jurisdiction or if they wish to. So the building blocks could involve disclosures that go beyond the remit of the ISSB, such as responding to the GRI information, satisfying a broader stakeholder information needs. So this building block approach reduces the need to duplicate information by having the globally consistent baseline, whilst also allowing companies who have to or want to report additional information, provided that it doesn't obscure the information required by the ISSB standards. Now, there's been global backing for this approach reflected in the ISSB's standards that set the global baseline. IOSCO, the International Organization of Securities Commissions, has announced its endorsement of ISSB standards and have asked their 130 jurisdictions around the world how they can incorporate ISSB standards into their regulatory frameworks. The Foundation works with audit and assurance standard setters such as the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, and you'll see a link to the new ISSA 5000 there, which is the new standard for assuring sustainability disclosures. The ISSB is working with jurisdictions around the world through its regulatory implementation program to determine how best jurisdictions that are planning, preparing for voluntary and mandatory adoption of the standards can proceed. And of course, there's work to support market participants who voluntarily wish to apply the standards. So just to be clear, the global baseline is ready to use and is reflected in the standards that we'll be describing today. And I'm going to hand over to Robert now to take us through describing the standards. Over to you, Robert.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much, Lois, for this introduction and for this first set of initial information. And hello, everyone. I'm Robert Svetowski from the IFRS Foundation, and we're moving now to the next section of this training with this module, and we'll talk. We'll get the first introduction into the IFRS S1 and S2. So. Yeah, we talk about a little bit about Lois talk about the business and market case, and how the landscape is becoming more streamlined, and so now we'll be turning into the standards itself. But before we do this, let's clarify a few key terms we'll use throughout this training today. So you will hear us saying sustainability-related financial information often. And what does it mean? So that simply means information is about the company's sustainability-related risks and opportunities that is useful to investors. So things like climate, biodiversity, or social issues, if they could affect the company's official outlook. So we'll also mention general purpose financial reports, and that includes the financial statement, but also the management commentary, sometimes called a management report or strategic report, depending on your jurisdiction. So, as I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with TCFD, and therefore, as we already said, the ISB standards are based on the same structure, architecture as the TCFD recommendations. So this should already look familiar to you. And the ISB standards are structured around the same four core pillars, which are governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. Each of these areas has a specific disclosure requirement. We will go through each one later, but if you haven't already, I do recommend downloading the standards and reviewing a detailed guidance. So, right, let's start with the IFRS S1. And yeah, just to start with, I would say, don't worry. It might sound technical at times, but much of it builds on the concept you already know. IFRS S1 sets out the general requirements for disclosing sustainability-related risks and opportunities, regardless of the topic. So not just climate, but also social biodiversity risk if they are financially relevant. As mentioned before, it builds on the TCFD framework and also prepares to the SASB standards and other guidance to help identify issues and metrics, especially at the industry level. So this all makes the disclosures more tailored and more meaningful. And lastly and importantly, IFRS 1 is designed to work alongside existing financial reporting standards, so any national gaps can be compatible with the IFRS S1. So that's a short intro to IFRS S1. We'll of course talk about it a bit later, but now let's now quickly move to give you an overview about IFRS S2, which are climate-related disclosures. So as it says, name suggests, it's focused specifically on climate. It builds on S1 standard, but zooms in on climate-related risks and opportunities like physical risks, floods, and droughts, and transition risks, and policy changes, low carbon technologies. These things were Jan already discussed a little bit. So again, it's same as one. It all incorporates all the TCFD recommendation, but goes further. For example, includes requirements on greenhouse gas emissions, scenario analysis, and industry-specific climate metrics. Again, SASB standards, the industry-based guidance is essential here. It helps identify which metrics are most relevant to your company's activities. So preparers must what it's called refer and consider the applicability of this SASB industry-based standards while implementing IFRS S2. As we already said, this is organized by industry, enabling a company to identify climate-related disclosure topics and metrics applicable to its business model and operations. All right, and then so now what is the relation and how they work together, the IFRS 1 and S2? So it's important to signal here that S1 and S2 are not optional add-ons. They're designed to be used together. So even if you're reporting on climate this year, you still need to apply IFRS S1 because it sets the framework defining materiality, requiring connected information, and outlining how to present disclosures that are useful to investors' decisions. So these are they are meant to work together. And we do want to now go through a little bit on conceptual foundations. These are important context-setting terms and expressions which are useful to understand in order to apply the standards. So yeah, these concepts they guide how information should be disclosed. So to start with, the standards require a fair presentation. That means provide a complete, neutral, and accurate picture of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So to start with, companies must fairly present a complete set of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. Fair presentation also requires disclosure to be faithfully represented, and to achieve this, companies shall provide a complete, neutral, and accurate depiction of sustainability-related risks and opportunities. The reporting entity concept, moving to the next one, requires the organizational boundary for sustainability-related financial disclosure and financial statements to be the same. And finally, another important concept is connected information. We saw earlier when Fiona explained how different risks are often interconnected. So the ISB standards require companies to clearly identify key connections, such as those between risks and opportunities, connections between the 4 content areas we introduced, and connection also between sustainability-related financial disclosures and the main financial statement. And we'll have now an example which will be presented by Lois, how this conceptual foundations can work in practice. Over to you, Lois.
Thank you, Robert. Yes, and in this example, we're particularly looking at the conceptual foundation Robert just mentioned of connectivity. Before I go into the example, though, I just want to remind everybody of the disclaimer that Fiona gave us at the beginning, that these examples are used to inspire and illustrate. They're simply our interpretation of extracts we've read in company reports. So please consider the examples in that context. So this example is from BHP, which is a global mining company, and it describes the impact on their business strategy and capital alignment and allocation of the climate-related risk assessments and scenario analyses that they have conducted over different timeframes. So you'll see in the first paragraph that the company tells us that those climate risk assessments and climate scenario analyses are actually integrated and connected into the company's overall main strategy and treated as a sensitivity in their capital allocation plans. So we see connections and alignment between the company's capital allocation plans, their strategy, but also aligned with their the rapidly decarbonizing global economy. So they're connecting all of these things together. Some assessments the company's undertaking are still in progress. So in the second paragraph, they tell us about physical climate-related risk assessments they're conducted. And we remember Jan told us earlier about the nature of these physical climate risks. And they look at the way in which the effect of those risks are connected to risks on the company's operations, productivities, and costs. And when they get the results, they tell us that the results will be used to inform updates to their risk profile and their risk management activities. So more connections there. Finally, the light grey text shows connections to further information on the impacts of climate-related risks on their operational activities, their GHG emissions across the value chain, on their financial statements, production, revenue, and expenditure. So there's more connections drawn in the places to which they refer us in the light grey text. So lots of connections there. And with that, hand back to you, Robert, to take us through a Zoom poll, I think.
Yes, that's correct. We have now a Zoom poll just to check on what we've been just covering, and now to check your understanding. So the question here is, what information should be considered for connectivity? And we have 3 different areas here. We have the 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. And answer B, it's the 2 sets of information, disclosure information, as the financial disclosures, sustainability related financial disclosures and financial statements. And the third one is the sustainability related risks and opportunities. So in accordance to the ISB standards and what is meant to be connected and what should be considered for connected information. And it's the answer coming in. And I'll give you a bit more time. and it's almost half of you took part in this Zoom poll, so I'm going to end it right now. And yes, all the answers are correct in the sense that all here apply, meaning that the connected information should be considered between all these elements which are listed here. So well done to ones who answered this way. All right, I'll be moving to the next part. We'll be talking about the materiality. So let's go through it as it is really important concept. So as defined by the IFRS Foundation, and so we're going also to deep dive this into in more detail later, but just to highlight for the moment, we'll be referring to date as to material information, which is information that if omitted, misstated, obscured, could reasonably be expected to affect investor decision making. So this just to signal this to start with, and there is a lot more information which you can refer to in order to apply the standards effectively. So during the ISSB consultation on the exposure droughts, one of the feedback topics was that importance of supporting PPRs, particularly those with limited resources and those in emerging markets. So in addition to the standards, which we were just introduced to you, and also application guidelines, which were published in 2023, a number of educational resources were also published, and since then others have followed, including IFRS Knowledge Hub. So we are also in the process of gathering examples and case studies provided by our partners. Then also the SASB standards were aligned with the IFRS 2 to help people seeking industry-based guidance, and the FSA credential was also updated and more planned to come. And then I should finally note that the IFRS Foundation Capacity Building Program launched at COP27 is a key part of the support to the preparers, and the SSE training, and this one we're having right now, is one of our most important deliverables. And with that, we'll be now going to the next Zoom poll. And what is and here the question is, what is the vital input business to your business, but water is the vital input to your business, but the ISB standards do not currently have a specific standard on water. So what do you need to do in such a case? And there are 4 answers here possible. So in the context of what we just discussed, what is the right action here? So the answer is we do not disclose anything about water. B, consult the source of guidance listed by ISSB. C, engage a consultancy to help. D, copy your competitors' reporting. And I'll give you a bit of time to answer this one. And I see a good pattern here appearing. So it looks like you do have a good understanding of it. And right, I'm gonna end poll right now. So yes, most of you answered correctly. What is the right thing to do is to consult the source of guidance listed by ISSB. That'd be the best thing to do. Of course, engaging a consultancy might be a good idea as well. And this is something which is, of course, not discouraged or forbidden by the standards. So that's also a thing you could consider to do. But no, doing anything or copying your competitors' reporting is not the best way to approach it. All right, so now with this, we'll be moving to
It's me.
Oh, yes, Fiona, over to you. Sorry.
No problem, Robert. Thanks very much for that. So that brings us to the end now of our first module. So just to recap quickly, I guess, on some of the key things that we've covered here before we go into our first exercise together. So we really reviewed the purpose of sustainability disclosures. And I think a key takeaway that we're hoping you'll leave this workshop with is that there's important benefits for both internal and external reasons to collect and disclose sustainability information. And then we also looked there at the evolution of the disclosure standards, the formation of the ISSB, and that aim to simplify the disclosure landscape. And when you're thinking about voluntary disclosures, you shouldn't see those as competing with the ISSB standards, but rather building on top of them using that building blocks approach that we talked about. And then finally, we've talked through the standards themselves and the important concepts that you need to use in order to apply them correctly. And so a key thing to reiterate here is that the standards and the guidance that come with them are designed to meet the needs of investors. And so they're heavily focused on those concepts about addressing material risks that we talked about later in the session. Great, so that brings us now to our first Menti exercise to reflect on this module, as I mentioned. So our first Menti question here will be to think about how we define objectives for sustainability disclosure. So we think that it is very useful to be clear on what you're trying to achieve through sustainability disclosures at the outset. And that can be good to have that clarity both for your internal team that might be focusing on adopting the standards, but also really useful to communicate with your stakeholders and with your leadership teams as well, to ensure that you've got a common understanding here of what needs you're trying to meet when you're preparing your reporting. So this will also involve thinking about particularly what reporting requirements you're seeking to meet. So that could be about a direct adoption of IFRS S1 and S2. It could be meeting the requirements of a jurisdictional regulation or disclosure requirement, or it could also be aligning to other industry standards as well. And overall, when you're thinking about what your objective is here, you may also want to think about what the degree of change is that you're going to need to make. So maybe if you already have some fairly evolved reporting, what you might need to do is just some small pieces of alignment or additional disclosure to implement the standards. But actually, maybe if you're at a much earlier point in the journey here, you might need to put in place quite a lot more in terms of practices and systems, etc. So thinking a little bit about how much change you think you'll be expected to make will be important as well, just to make sure that you're setting a goal that's at the right ambition level for your organization and where you need to get to. So let's take a look now in Menti together at this. So if I could just ask Lois to reshare again the link to Menti, I'll take us in now to look at this question together. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So the Menti link is just there again. It's the same link that we've already used. So if you were using that already, that will be available. I know a few people have asked about the code. You can also enter that code that's visible now at the top of the screen if you want to access it this way. But if you follow the link that Lois has shared, that will take you directly in without the need for a code as well. But thanks to those who've already shared their responses here. So just a moment really to reflect as we move through the session on what your organization's objectives are here, or what you think they could be if this is maybe an earlier point in the process for you. We're not going to hold you, of course, to anything that you say today in Menti, but it's just a useful exercise, hopefully, to reflect from what we've heard so far about some of these different drivers and which ones are kind of most front of mind for your organization. So I'm seeing someone mentioned branding, following regulation and attracting investors. And then I'm seeing getting appreciation of the best in class in current disclosures that they can apply. Okay. And this person said that sustainability disclosures aim to show transparency, manage ESG risks, meet regulations, attract investors, and demonstrate long-term responsible value creation. So indeed, that's quite a balanced approach, considering all of those different possible drivers that you might have. And so I'm seeing compliance, increasing transparency is being mentioned several times here. Maybe managing ESG risks as well is something else. Someone's mentioned about thinking about their long-term strategy. It's great to take that long-term horizon scanning approach where you're thinking about it from that perspective and thinking beyond just, what do I need to comply with, but actually how can this benefit us in terms of our strategic resilience as well. meeting regulatory expectations. I think this person's mentioned as well as a starting point. So absolutely, that might be a good way to, prioritize and focus to begin with, is making sure that you comply with what you need to from a regulatory perspective. But maybe that's a good platform to then build out from and to think about some of these broader objectives as well. So someone's also mentioned that the processes are important for assisting markets to address climate change impacts and risks. Exactly. So if you're in a bank and you may be being regulated in this topic, or your investors are pushing for it, that's one thing. But of course, as you say, your role in the market with your clients and lendees, etc., is really important as well in terms of how you can then shape and inform their approach to managing climate risk. So that intermediary role is really important to highlight too. So someone's mentioned as well about using the capitals approach across financial, manufactured, human, intellectual, social, relationship, and natural. So demonstrating progress of companies' contributions to the SDGs. So yeah, perhaps you're also thinking about this from more of an impact perspective as well. So that's something we'll talk about the alignment point with GRI a little bit later in the session, and integrated reporting too. So stakeholders I'm seeing mentioned, transparency, regulatory compliance, a few similar themes. I'll see if anything jumps out at me that's a little bit different perhaps. And someone's mentioned here a clearer picture of the sustainable practices that have been incorporated into an institution's operations and the implications. So that's a kind of a good point, really, is that actually disclosure can sometimes operate as a useful way of summarizing and reflecting on everything that you've implemented internally. Maybe builds a bit of discipline about actually documenting that in a clear fashion and agreeing internally what those processes are and how they interconnect. So a good exercise annually, perhaps as part of your disclosures, to review that and make sure that's all well documented and clear cut. Great. And someone's mentioned about the need for concise and clean reporting for investors. So indeed, with the S1 and S2 standards, of course, that investor audience is really paramount here. So concise is a good word to use there, and we'll come back to that in the communications module later as well. Okay. Decision useful information is another point to highlight, and someone's mentioned the need to comply with the ESRS, the European standards, in their context. And demonstrating how they've integrated risks and opportunities indeed. Brilliant. Lots of great responses here. Thank you everyone for the great engagement so far and interaction. It's always useful to have lots of good ideas to discuss together, and I'm sure good food for thought for other participants as well. Brilliant. I see some similar themes, so I think that's very useful to share. Thanks everyone for highlighting that. So I think really you've mentioned there a lot of the things that we would have recommended. A few kind of summary points, I guess, to highlight about setting objectives for your reporting is to be thinking about that audience that you want to report to. So here with the IFRS standards, we're very much thinking about that investor audience. So perhaps you might already have some feedback from your investors about specific topics that are of interest to them for your sector or for your organization in particular. So great to take on board any existing feedback you might have received from stakeholders to plan your future disclosures. And then speaking to future, I think as much as you can, maybe aiming to go beyond compliance with current day regulations, but thinking about how you can build a process that's flexible and adaptable to potential future requirements and greater maturity and time is great as well. And overall, as I think we've probably highlighted here, and many of you have as well, aiming to maximize those internal benefits from the outset is a great thing to keep in mind as you're developing your approach here. Okay, brilliant. So that brings us now to the start of our next module. And I see Robert's ready and waiting to get us started with that one. Thanks, Robert.
Yes, great. Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, indeed. We'll be moving to the next module, which we'll call Align. So now that we have introduced the initial concepts, we'll dive into the ASB standards and we'll take into account additional disclosures, including any relevant geographical or sectoral requirements, as well peer practices and your leadership objectives. So in order to understand how to ensure your disclosures meet global standards, we will look at the two concepts in this unit, and the first and main focus will be on how to apply the standards to achieve global baseline disclosures. And once we cover that, we will also discuss how additional disclosures fit. So to begin with, let's focus on the ISB as a global baseline. And we already showed you the 4 core pillars. And so now we're coming back to this, and we will go one by one and answer what is the required for each of these categories. So for each, starting with the governance, and for each of the content areas, we'll discuss a list of questions that you could ask in your company to start identifying the information that will support some of the disclosure requirements, for example, as a part of gap analysis. So in the context of the governance and management requirements, we can see that there are several that are fairly qualitative for that category. So the questions you might want to ask here are, for example, which bodies are responsible for the oversight and management of processes, controls, and procedures of sustainability-related risks and opportunities? For example, is management responsibility delegated to a specific role or committee? Secondly, you might want to ask how often and when do they get informed about sustainability-related risks and opportunities? Third, how these issues inform strategy and how they inform decision-making and risk management. So this includes setting targets to manage sustainability-related risks and opportunities. And then also, there will be important question to ask whether the progress against these targets is linked to executive remuneration. So for more information, you may use the SSE checklist tool, but then remember, it's not a replacement for reading and using the full ISB standards. So now I will hand over to Jan, and she will present an example how the governance requirement might be applied in practice. Over to you, Jan.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
My apologies. So thanks a lot, Robert and Fiona. Here's an example on how disclosures on IFRS S1 and S2 governance core content can be done. And this particular example comes from an asset management firm, which is a listed company on the London Stock Exchange. So while doing their TCFD reporting, this financial institution first gives a snapshot of the governance structure, processes around how climate-related risk and opportunities are given oversight of, and the management's role in these procedures to manage and monitor such risk and opportunities as well. So their governance structure starts with the board sitting at the top, which delegates specific responsibilities to several committees serving different functions. So for example, the board Audit and Risk Committee is chaired by a non-executive director and is responsible for overseeing financial reporting, risk management, internal controls, and audit, whereas the group's chief executive would chair the Group Management Committee, which deals with the day-to-day running of business. Then the Group Strategy Committee will develop the company's overall business strategy. And the chief executive also chairs the group sustainability and impact committee, which reviews, recommends the overall sustainability and impact strategy, and also monitors the company's progress towards sustainability related goals, such as emissions reductions. So these committees include members of business units, such as wealth management, private asset, and so on, and implement the group's strategy, including those related to climate and sustainability risks. So on this slide here, we can see what comes after this high-level snapshot as the company goes into details, exploring what each committee is composed of, how frequently they've met, as shown on the left-hand side. Then they also went into details about what each of these committees is responsible for, who and what they advise, in the middle. Then in the right-hand side column, we can see that this company also gave specific examples of what these committees discussed and included some specific examples on the discussion outcomes. So for example, we can see the group management committee confirmed that the group's climate-related risks are key risk, material risks to the bank. And then the group strategy committee then incorporates these risks into the group strategy. And then they regularly review trends to update their strategy. Then the group risk committee then works with the group CFO with risk controls by reviewing and updating the bank's overall risk management framework and also internal ESG audit framework as well. And all of these governance structure is supposed to support this company's commitment to reaching net zero by 2040. So with that, I'm handing over back to Fiona.
Great, thanks so much, Jan. I think that example hopefully helps to make governance fairly clear and an approach that an organisation can take to this. So that will move us on to the next core content area, which is strategy. So strategy is where we do have a few more disclosures to include than governance, but it's also really where companies can see the benefits from sustainability-related opportunities and being better prepared for those risks as well. So as you can see here, there are 3 high-level areas that we focus on in the strategy core content, and these are risks and opportunities, their effects, and then resilience. So we'll take a look at each of these separately now as well. So starting with those questions to evaluate on the risks and opportunities side. So the S1 and S2 disclosure requirements on strategy are designed to enable users of reports to understand how the company is managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So if we first look at those requirements on risks and opportunities, these are some of the questions that you want to think about. So when we're disclosing information about risks, information required will include a description of the effects, the time horizons over which those effects are expected to occur. And that's where we also need to keep in mind that financial effects could occur before the risk or opportunity materializes. They might occur after the risk, or they can change over time as well. So that's where time horizons can be a little bit difficult or different, I suppose, when we're thinking about sustainability. And then the last questions on the list in particular look at climate. So this is aligning with the requirements of S2. So for example, investors want to understand what types of risks and opportunities have been assessed and identified. And this is where we'll often see companies using the categories that were developed by the TCFD of transition risk and physical risk. And for both S1 and S2, the guidance alongside the standards includes support for companies to identify and disclose these risks and opportunities. And it also recommends to make use of further resources, including industry-based guidance and the SASB standards here as well. So I've mentioned already that an aspect that needs to be disclosed in this part of the content requirements is the time horizons that have been used and over which the risks and opportunities will be impacting the organisation. And the standards ask you to identify this, but they don't define explicitly what short, medium and long term is. And that's because this really will vary between companies and it will depend on quite a few different factors. So for example, the time horizons that you use could consider what your organization's investment and business planning cycles are, maybe what the strategic planning and capital allocation timeframes are, the lifespan of the assets that you operate maybe, or that you own, and then also the assessment period that your investors are using as well. So what's important to keep in mind here is that you do need to provide a clear definition. So don't expect your investors to necessarily know what you mean by short and medium term unless you tell them. And there's a few different resources that you can refer to help you identify these time horizons. So you might consider those that are used by peer organizations in your sector. You might also look at the 3 horizons framework that we've highlighted on the slide here, which also supports you if you maybe need to use different horizons to consider different aspects of risk and opportunity as well. So moving on now to the second group of disclosures in the strategy category. So that first section was around identifying the risks and opportunities. It's only natural then the next aspect of disclosure would be to consider exactly what the effects of those risks and opportunities are and where that occurs in the business. So to start tackling this disclosure areas, companies will want to ask themselves questions such as thinking about what the effects are, where they would expect them to occur across the business model and value chain, and what kind of responses or mitigations they might already have in place or think should be implemented to address that risk or opportunity. And then the final aspect of the strategy component is around resilience. And so thinking particularly about how the company is prepared for uncertainties and assessing those on an ongoing basis. And so this really gets into the practices and processes that a company has in place to make strategic adjustments and consider its long-term resilience. And so the disclosure aspect here is really all about how you've used climate scenario analysis within your assessments. And so there's two key aspects here is disclosing the results of that assessment and also disclosing the inputs and the key assumptions that have been used so that stakeholders can understand how you've used scenario analysis and how you've reached those conclusions. So some questions that you'll want to consider asking internally when you're starting to disclose on this will be thinking about the company's capacity to react or adjust to uncertainties. And so this could be a more simple qualitative assessment to start with and kind of done in a narrative way before you then think about how you can use and employ scenarios to assess that in more depth. And so one aspect we know that can be a bit of an obstacle for companies when they're starting out with this topic is to understand the level of detail that needs to be disclosed and how we balance between perhaps starting with qualitative information, but maybe is there a requirement to develop quantitative disclosures over time? So under IFRS S1 and S2, a company is required to disclose both quantitative and qualitative information about the current and anticipated financial effects of sustainability risks and opportunities. However, the standards do set out criteria for when only qualitative information is required, or perhaps a mix of qualitative and quantitative information might be acceptable. And so these criteria are the following. So either if a company can't separate the effects of a climate risk or opportunity from other effects, so it's not possible to disaggregate specifically what the effect is that relates to a climate risk from broader risk types. Or secondly, if there's a high level of measurement uncertainty, so it's simply not possible to provide that quantification. And finally, if the company doesn't currently have the skills, capabilities, or resources to provide that quantitative information. So overall, if you do have quantitative information relating to material financial effects, it is important that you're transparent about that. But equally, there are some acknowledgements within the standards of why that might not always be possible to provide. Okay, so this question comes immediately after I've presented on this, so hopefully it'll be familiar in your minds, but a quick question to test whether you heard that point just there about quantitative and qualitative disclosures. So can a company choose to disclose only qualitative information and or a combination of quantitative and qualitative information about financial effects when? And you select as many of the following as you think are correct options. So either if it can't separate the effects of climate risks or opportunities from other effects, if there's a high level of measurement uncertainty, or if the quantitative information sheds a negative light on the company. So I'll just give everyone a few more moments to have a think about that before we look at the answers. I see the numbers on the poll are ticking up gradually, so I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. Okay. We always like to have lots of participation in the poll, so I'll give a few more seconds. I see we're reaching just under half of you have taken part. Okay, let's end the poll there and I'll share the results. So it looks like the majority of you who responded here were indeed correct. So the first two options there, of course, as we just covered, were acceptable reasons for disclosing qualitative information. But as most of you correctly identified, the bottom option there is not an acceptable reason here. Of course, if you do have quantitative information that suggests there might be a negative financial impact, it's important that you're transparent about that and you provide balance in your disclosures on that information. So some of the examples that we'll share and talk about today will hopefully demonstrate that there are indeed companies who are providing that level of transparency. We know often it can be concerning perhaps internally to be providing disclosure on negative impacts. But of course, I think the key point to highlight here is just because you haven't disclosed a risk doesn't mean that your investors are not assessing that risk themselves already. So if you don't disclose that information, maybe your peers in your sector already are, that will leave your investors wondering, are you not thinking about that risk? Are you not mitigating it? So important to provide that transparency. Okay, thank you everyone for that. So I think I'll be passing back over to Jan now, who's going to take us through another example to help bring this to life.
Thank you, Fiona, for the clarifications on the strategy core content. So right now I'm going to present a disclosure example from a bank, which can hopefully help us understand some possible ways of how disclosures on strategy core content in both IFRS S1 and S2 can be done. So remember, within the strategy core content in S1 and S2, reporting entities need to disclose their strategy for managing sustainability and climate-related risks and opportunities, including first, what these risks and opportunities that could affect financial prospect, business model, value chain, decision-making are, and second, the current and anticipated effect of these risks and opportunities on the reporting entity's financial prospects. So this specific example here shows how disclosures can be done when it comes to climate-related opportunities, covering both their own operations and also through the bank's offerings of services and products to clients, as shown in the first and second column. And they have also included disclosures of these offerings' anticipated effects on the bank's financial prospects, which you can find on the right-hand side column. So, for example, the first opportunity that this bank saw was about supporting customers' transition to net zero. And this is about opportunities for the bank to provide climate and sustainable funding, lending, financing solutions to customers to support their transition. So more concrete examples of such funding and financing offerings would have been elaborated in their earlier disclosures report on climate. But just to give more context here, some of these include such as providing loans to support transport sectors, clients' decarbonization, issuing of sustainability linked loans and bonds. And also, they are providing bespoke advice to customers on overcoming barriers to retrofit their mortgaged homes. And they're also providing services, just free energy performance or efficiency assessments even. And through supporting their customers' transition to net zero, the bank anticipated positive contribution to an overall enhancement of their own climate resilience of its business strategy and business model, which is a disclosure requirement found in paragraph 9E in IFRS S2 under strategy. Then the anticipated effects on the bank's financial prospects of this particular opportunity, which is also required in the strategy disclosure in S2, paragraph 9B to D, have been presented in the right-hand side column, including, for example, they anticipated to see an increase in volume of climate and sustainable funding and financing on both on and off balance sheets. And the bank also targets to provide a 100 billion British pounds by the end of this year to support customers' transition to net zero. They also anticipated an increase in balance sheet volume through demand for new products and services that would support such customer transition. But on the other hand, they also foresaw additional expenditure to allow them to keep developing new products and services to support the customer's transition. And but with all of these offerings, they anticipated an overall decrease in the finance emissions due to helping their customers transition to net zero and therefore decreasing their own Scope 3 finance emissions. Then I think I'll move on to the next one about. So now let's take a more specific look at the climate transition plan disclosures, as that is part of disclosure requirement within the strategy core content under IFRS S2, if the reporting company has a transition plan. So we'll just briefly mention a few key frameworks that underpin the transition plans for financial institutions, followed by a practical example. For financial institutions such as banks, there are many global initiatives towards net zero that aim to provide joint efforts towards financing a net zero future. And one of these key initiatives is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, which is a global coalition of financial institutions committed to mainstreaming the decarbonization of the global economy to reach net zero emissions by 2050. And since GFANZ's conception in 2021, they have worked to develop frameworks needed to turn financial institutions' net zero commitments into action. So drawing on and amplifying the enormously valuable work of the many organizations that have driven climate action for years. And on this slide here, you can see a figure that nicely summarizes GFAN's recommendations for financial institutions when it comes to what they can do, what they can consider in order to achieve the transition to net zero. So following commitment, setting of decarbonization targets, and designing an overall decarbonization strategy, at the end of the day, for financial institutions to help the global economy reach net zero, they will need to work closely with their clients and portfolio companies to support and enable their own net zero commitments and implement their own transition plan. And this support to clients or customers' net zero transition often requires the assessment of the client's transition performance and credibility. In this regard, GFANZ recommends that financial institutions consider sectoral decarbonization pathways, and GFANZ also recommends a number of metrics that can be used to assess or judge the level of a portfolio's alignment to 1.5 degrees Celsius pathways. For example, one of the metrics would be implied temperature rise, or ITR. This is an absolute metric that translates emission data into a likely projected end-of-century global warming outcome or temperature, estimating how much the Earth would warm if the entire economy behaved like this particular company or portfolio. Then another metric is looking at the share or percentage of portfolio companies that with science validated 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned emissions reductions targets. On top of these two, GFANZ also recommends measuring benchmark divergence. So this is not an absolute, but rather a relative metric that measures how far a company, a portfolio, or a sector is away from the 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned pathway. And this works by comparing emissions trajectory of that particular portfolio or a company with a benchmark scenario, such as a science-based 1.5 degrees pathway. Then there is also a metric, which is what the GFANZ refers to as maturity scale alignment. So it works by grouping portfolio companies into alignment categories. So they have they recommend to classify these companies into aligned, aligning, and not aligned to the 1.5 degrees pathway. And depending on the status of the company or the clients, GFANZ would recommend 4 financing strategies. So they would recommend financing or enabling the development scaling of climate solutions. They would also recommend financing or enabling entities that are already aligning, and financing or enabling managed phase out of high emitting physical assets in case this is a not aligned company or portfolio or client that we're looking at. And onto the next slide here is their framework on financial institutions' portfolio alignment measurement framework. So financial institutions need to measure their portfolio alignment to climate goals, such as the 1.5 degrees goal, to understand how their investment, lending, and underwriting activities support the global transition to a net zero company. To support financial institutions in measuring their portfolio alignment, this is the framework that the GFANZ has come up with. So essentially, there are 9 key judgments pertaining to 3 steps of portfolio alignment that banks could and should consider. So you can see a summary of this framework on the slide here. While I'm not going to all the details of the framework here, as you can use the link to read the detailed guidance from GFANZ, I will summarize concisely some of the key points. So I mentioned 3 steps. The step 1 would begin with translating scenario-based carbon budgets into benchmarks. So in this particular step, there are 3 decisions or key judgments that would need to be made concerning, first, what type of benchmark should be built? So that would be, which sectors are my portfolio companies in? Are there sectoral pathways that I can use? The second question or key judgment would be, how should benchmark scenarios be selected? In this regard, GFANZ recommends using a 1.5 degrees Celsius aligned scenario. Then the third decision would be concerning whether absolute or intensity-based emissions metrics should be used. In this regard, GFANZ recommends using multiple metrics in combination to reflect different decarbonization levels. Then the second step is about assessing alignment at counterparty level. In this particular step, there are 4 key judgments or decisions that should be made regarding, first, what emission scope should be included. GFANZ recommends Scope 3 emissions should be included if Scope 3 emissions represent or exceed 40% of a counterparty's total emissions. The second key question would be about how should emissions baseline be quantified. So the recommendation for this is that financial institutions consider the PCAF standards. And the third question would be, how should forward-looking emissions be estimated? In this regard, it is recommended that both forward-looking emissions estimation based on stated emissions targets and a backward-looking approach be used. That would be based on historical emissions. Then the final key question in step 2 would be, how should alignment be measured? So the recommendation here is that alignment should be assessed on a cumulative emissions basis over short and medium terms, and which should together supplement a longer term time horizon. Then the final step, step 3, finally concerns assessing portfolio level alignment. In this step, there are 2 key decisions to be made. First one, how should alignment be expressed in a metric? So we've covered this in previous slide, like ITR and the others, so I won't bore you with repetition here. And then finally, the last key judgment or key decision is about how should counterparty level alignment be aggregated into a portfolio level alignment score. The recommendation here is that an aggregated budget approach, which computes the overall carbon budget overshoot or undershoot at portfolio level. This means combining individual company level carbon emissions data across an entire portfolio to determine whether the total emissions are within or exceed the allocated carbon budget for staying within a specific climate goal, such as limiting warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this aggregated data provides a holistic view on how the entire portfolio aligns or not with the target, allowing banks and financial institutions to gauge their overall climate impact more accurately and so that they can make more necessary adjustments if needed to stay on track here. So I also wanted to already give an shout out that we are at the Risk Center we're going to kick off a project that is particularly focusing on assessing client for banks, assessment on their clients' transition plans. So how do we judge how credible a client transition plan is? What should we be looking at? How do we translate the outcome of the assessment into risk management process? So I'll talk a little bit about that later, but just to give a teaser here. So I'll move on to the next slide here. And this is, apart from GFANS, is another very essential framework on transition plan that we should be informed about. So the IFRS Foundation work on consolidating their standards in order to harmonize the sustainability reporting and disclosure landscape is ongoing. And since the announcement made in June, in the previous years, the IFRS Foundation has already assumed the responsibility from the UK Transition Plan Task Force to develop disclosure-specific materials on transition plans. So this is the TPT, or Transition Plan Task Force Disclosure Framework, which has already been presented on the screen here. So this sets good practice for robust and credible transition plan disclosures. So this particular framework provides a set of disclosure recommendations that a reporting company, including a bank, can use as guidance on how to report more effectively on the transition plan related aspects, which is part of the IFRS S2 disclosures. Here you can see that this framework has the structure of this framework. As I said earlier, it is divided into 5 disclosure elements that incorporate a GFANS net zero transition plan framework. And the 5 elements are foundations, implementation strategy, engagement strategy, metrics and targets, and governance. Just very briefly on what each of these elements means here. Foundation is about disclosing the strategic ambition with robust emissions reduction targets. So your overall long-term and interim targets for reducing your emissions. And implementation strategy and engagement strategy are about the actions. So including those related to business operations, changes in portfolios that, of offerings that you're giving to your clients, could be policy changes, and also changes in engagement activities to achieve the strategic ambition. So then your net zero goal mentioned in foundations. Then metrics and targets would talk about measurement of decarbonization progress and financial implications of such mitigative or adaptative measures that have been taken in order to decarbonize and reach your strategic ambition. And finally, governance is about the oversight of the delivery of the transition plan. Then important to note here is that important to note here is that this disclosure framework adopts the ISSB definition of transition plan. So which, according to Appendix A of IFRS S1, refers to an aspect of an entity's overall strategy that lays out the entity's targets, actions, and/or resources for its transition towards a lower carbon economy, including actions such as reducing their own emissions. And also important to note is that the TPT disclosure framework also adopts the ISSB's financial materiality approach. This means that companies using the framework for their transition plan disclosures need to do materiality assessment to determine if they need to make disclosures on the shall recommendations included in the disclosure framework recommendations. Then after talking about the frameworks, we are moving to something more practical. So we're looking at an example from HSBC's 2024 transition plan as how these disclosures can be made. So basically, this particular report covers 3 major components. The first one would be the principles and overall approach to net zero adopted by the bank, which aim to be, well, in their case, they want to have science-based emissions reductions targets. They want to be transparent and accountable. And that is augmented through the use of established frameworks, such as the decarbonization target they have, as I said, are science-based. And they're also disclosing their financed emissions through using the PCAF standards. Interesting to note here is that the net zero transition plan of this particular bank actually also aims to integrate nature. And the way they do that is by financing and investing in nature-related solutions that also contribute to net zero or decarbonization, while also conserving and restoring the nature. So for example, they're looking into supporting innovative climate and nature-focused tech startups. And they are also considering the vulnerable communities, so impacts on these vulnerable communities, when they are disclosing their net zero transition plan. Then the second component that the report covers is that they identify key sectors whose net zero transition is what the bank is prioritizing in supporting. And for this particular bank, these sectors that they want to prioritize would include energy supply, transport, heavy industry, real estate, food, forest, and other land use. And this is the case given the larger carbon footprint of these particular sectors in the bank's portfolio. And the third component would be an implementation plan that the bank adopts to realize the strategic ambition of reaching net zero by 2050. We're still in the same example here, and often when companies or banks engage with their customers and suppliers for transition planning, they also do so to help assess these entities' transition plans. So the same goes with HSBC, given that it is a financial institution and a huge chunk of their emissions stem from Scope 3 indirect and specifically finance emissions. They do have an engagement strategy that supports their customers' net zero transition. They start doing that by identifying customers across all sectors and implementing strategy to engage with each of these sectors. The engagement activity would involve collecting and assessing customer transition plan information, followed by suggesting transition solutions. And this is done through three things. The first, assessing how robust the customer transition plans are in order to guide their own engagement and financing solutions, how they could adjust these things. And secondly, through offering tailored one-to-one engagement with select corporate and institutional customers to understand and support their specific transition needs. And then finally, through leadership, research, and also having partnership events to inform customers about sustainable investment opportunities and market insights. And in terms of assessing the robustness or credibility of the customer transition plan to guide the engagement and financing solutions, the bank is evaluating a couple of things. So they're looking at the ambition of the plan. This means the bank checks if the customer has committed to net zero, whether they have set interim targets to support their long-term targets. They're also looking at credibility. So this would include reviewing details of the customer's transition plans that they have disclosed, what they're looking at, what are the actions that they're disclosing to achieve their targets, such as investment requirements and business context. And they're also looking at the credibility of these actions. So they would request evidence of action that the clients have taken to implement their strategic plan of reducing their emissions. And of course, climate risk is also an important consideration. The bank also looks at both physical and transition risk to which the customer may be exposed. And on to the next slide here. So this and the next slide will showcase some of HSBC's actions and plans to reach their own net zero goal. So starting with this slide here on what the bank is supporting through providing financing of projects that contribute to global decarbonization. This can be summarized into four major areas. The first one is financing sustainable infrastructure. The second one is on scaling new economy companies. So the bank has launched several programs, such as including funding schemes that specifically offer capital to climate tech companies, I've mentioned startups, as well as vulnerable communities. They're also offering loans to improve energy transition to renewables by corporate clients. The third element or major area that bank is also working on to decarbonize their own footprint is ecosystem collaboration for supply chain decarbonization. For example, the bank is developing financing schemes that help corporate clients decarbonize not only their own operations, but also their supply chains. And finally, they are also establishing a nature capital or natural capital as an asset class. So the bank established a new joint venture specializing in offering investment solutions that would help protect biodiversity, but also something that would contribute or accelerate the net zero transition. So, for example, they are investing in nature restoration, conservation projects, and they are also funding programs that are in collaboration with NGOs, which actually ended up being some of the world's largest community-based nature restoration project, as it already helped millions of smallholder farmers restore up to millions of hectares of degraded land, while also contributing to decarbonization. Then onto the final slide before we have the break is so this slide talks about the bank, how the bank aims to transition its portfolio to net zero by 2050 through a sustainable investment strategy that focuses on climate and biodiversity in core investing solutions and processes. The focus here is on integrating environmental, social, and governance factors into investment strategies, and offering sustainability-focused products ranging from equities to fixed incomes, ETFs, and the others. But I'll not go through each of the categories. It's worth highlighting that this aligns with what we've covered in the previous slide. For example, concerning investment in natural capital and biodiversity. Apart from the initiative that I've just mentioned, the bank also offers biodiversity screened ETFs. So I think I'm going to hand over to Fiona before we dive into the next section.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jan, for taking us through all of that deep dive, really, and hopefully helping to bring to life what transition planning can look like for the banking sector. Fantastic. So with that, we're going to take a short break now. I'm sure everyone will be pleased to hear. So I'm going to play you some music, and we'll have a timer on the screen which shows you when we'll be restarting the session. So we'll take a 5-minute break now. As you're already doing, feel free to continue to ask your questions in the Q&A whilst we're in the break. And otherwise, hope you enjoy a little bit of a relaxing 5 minutes, and we'll see you following that. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the training. Hope you had an opportunity to have a stretch and a drink and that you're ready for the last part of this training. So we've covered the first two core content areas, governance and strategy, and we're moving on to risk management now. That's the next core content area. So you can see from the high level description here that this category of disclosures requires report preparers to disclose information about their processes for risk management, for sustainability related risk and opportunity, as well as how those fit into their overall risk profile and risk processes. So digging a bit deeper into this category, just to remind you, in the strategy content area, we made it clear that the standards refer to all sustainability related risks and opportunities with a focus on those that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's prospects. So in the risk management disclosures core content area, the focus now turns to exactly how a company identifies those risks and opportunities and assesses them. So the questions you might want to ask to evaluate the risk management processes include: what are those processes and policies that are being used to identify, assess, prioritize and monitor climate-related risks and opportunities? And how and to what extent are those processes and policies integrated into the company's overall risk management processes? So internally, you might also want to ask questions about which inputs and parameters are used for risk management, whether and how sustainability related risks and opportunities are prioritized, including by reference to what criteria, such as the nature, likelihood and magnitude of risks and opportunities. And of course, bearing in mind that sustainability related risks and opportunities can manifest over different time horizons than other risks, and that they have different characteristics. So beyond those, the standards, well, we're also asking about the integration of the sustainability risk and opportunity management into your overall processes. So we're going to look at this in more detail from the perspective of a bank, and I'm going to pass back to Jan to do that. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks a lot, Lois. Let me find. Yes. So in the upcoming several slides here, we're going to be looking at what some banks are doing for risk management disclosures. So this is an example from a Japanese financial institution on risk management disclosure A. So remember, disclosure A in risk management is about disclosures of climate risks. So what are a company's processes and policies for identifying, assessing, prioritizing, and monitoring these climate risks? And the bank follows 3 steps to manage their climate-related risks. Step 1 would be an environmental scan of the external and internal business environment to identify potential risk drivers that could threaten the business or financial standing. Step 2, they then assess the potential impact and probability of the identified risks. So how bad could it possibly be, and how likely could these happen? Then step 3, they end up with some top risks or material risks, meaning that these are the risks that they foresee as most likely to materialize or result in actual impact to the bank's financials, and hence they prioritize managing these risks. On to the next slide here is about disclosure B of risk management. So again, this part of the disclosure requirement is about reporting information concerning the processes and policies, not only for managing sustainability and climate-related risks, but also for sustainability and climate-related opportunities as well. So in this particular example, this bank, Bank of Montreal, BMO, uses one approach for risk management that embeds both climate risks and opportunities across their operations and business decision making. So the process looks like identify, assess, manage, monitor, and report. And they also have what they call 3 lines of defense, which is at the bottom of the pyramid that you can see on the slide here, with operating groups first, then portfolio management, legal compliance as the second line of defense. Then finally, internal audit will guard the whole process to ensure compliance to disclosure requirements as the third and final line of defense. Climate opportunities, according to this particular bank in their disclosures, are identified across various levels of their operating structures and client engagement. For example, the Sustainability Office collaborates with partners across the bank to capitalize on climate-related opportunities, and they also contribute to managing of climate-related risk as well. And the heads of the capital markets, wealth management, personal and commercial banking would lead strategies to capture business growth opportunities. So that would include something like climate finance. And each of these operating group organizes itself differently to capture climate opportunities and also manage their climate-related risks. And I'll move on to the next slide here to look at something more specific. So we're still talking about risk management disclosure B, so still about process and policies about climate and sustainability related opportunities. So this is something new that that did not already exist in the TCFD. So I thought we wanted to provide another disclosure example here, just to shed more light on how this can be done. And this is from a UK bank. The table here shows how the bank identifies and manages climate opportunities. So this bank looks at climate transition and physical risk drivers, which you can see in the middle column, to also identify where opportunities may lie, as you can see in the left-hand side column. So we can see that the bank reviews the emissions associated with their own operations and financing activities to clients to identify the opportunity to support its colleagues and customers to transition to net zero economy. So the bank looks at which time horizon, so whether it's short, medium, or long term, these opportunities may materialize as displayed in the final column. So this exercise has allowed the bank to identify climate opportunities in areas such as financing EVs and also residential mortgages in the real estate sector. And that has led them to pursue these opportunities by developing related banking products, such as home insurance to mitigate physical climate risk, and also other opportunity to drive energy efficient solutions for their clients as well. And on to the next slide here, we are looking at the final disclosure requirement C under risk management, which is about how the processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability and climate risk and opportunities can be integrated into the overall company or bank's risk management practices. And here's an example also from the same bank, Lloyds, which embeds climate risk and opportunities into their own enterprise risk management framework. They do so by considering climate risk such as its own principal risk, which to them refers to a board-approved enterprise-wide risk category. And then they integrate this principal risk, climate change, in with other principal risks such as credit risk, operational risk, data risk, so that the board can regularly review and update their strategy to manage them. And based on the information reported by different units of the corporate as well. So the bank's enterprise risk management framework is also what the board revisits regularly. So they consider both the strategic risk themes, so the black colored column on the left, and how they relate to the pertinent or emerging risk and opportunities, as shown in the right-hand side graphics on the on the slide here that can be identified through collaboration between different functions across the banks group and regulatory and industry bodies as well. I think I'll now hand over back to Lois or Fiona.
No, to me.
To Robert. Okay.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, we're now moving to the next section. Will be then covering the last key content area, metrics and targets. So let's start with looking at this and then see how some key conversations that should be happening. What would be the key conversations should be happening to inform disclosures when disclosing metrics and targets, and we'll start with metrics. So requirements on metrics are designed to enable investors to understand companies' performance in relation to its sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So preparers should disclose information explaining how the metrics are defined, if they're absolute or relative, if they have been validated by a third party, as well as the methodology. So what is the method of calculation? What are the inputs? And are there limitations and what assumptions are involved? That's about metrics, and then moving to targets. For each target, the company may have to start asking internally some questions to be able to disclose information required by the SSB. And these questions could be whether qualitative or quantitative these targets are, and whether it is set voluntarily or by law or regulation. So the other question would be the metric, of course, used to set the target and to monitor the progress towards its achievement. And then finally, the baseline period from which progress is measured and the period to which target applies. And further, what are the milestones and interim targets, if there are any, and if there have been any revisions to the target together with the explanation about the revisions. So these questions should help you get started on making sure you have the key information that will assist in meeting some of these standards. And now we're moving again to the next Zoom poll and to test your knowledge. So the question here is, what is the objective of the metrics? And we have 3 answers here. Please do select all which apply. The first answer is to understand performance in relation to company sustainability-related risks and opportunities. B is to understand progress towards any targets, and C understands the company's assumptions for the future. And I think that should be fairly straightforward. So we see there's quite a few people joining the poll here. In the context of the ASB standards here, the correct answers, I'm going to end the poll now. The correct answers is A and B. So strictly speaking, as indicated by SSP's metrics are to help understand performance in relation to the sustainability risk and opportunities, and to understand progress towards any particular targets. It's not about understanding companies' assumptions for the future. The objective of the metric, it's more specific and related to the target. Right. So now be moving to some more climate-specific considerations in the context of metrics and targets. And in particular, we'll be spending some time on greenhouse gas emissions as this one of this variable, which is the key element of the disclosures. So questions on greenhouse gas emissions often come up in questions on metrics and target disclosures. So that's why we wanted to address this more specifically here. So again, to recap, for those who might not be familiar with the different scopes, we have 3 different scopes of greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 1 includes all direct emissions that occur from sources owned or controlled by the company, such as emissions from your company's facilities or vehicles. Scope 2 includes emissions from generation of acquired and consumed electricity, steam, heat, cooling, such as electricity you purchase. And then scope 3 is then all other indirect emissions that occur in the company's value chain. So what are the requirements here? So S2 requires a company to disclose its absolute gross scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol corporate standard, unless a jurisdiction requires a company to use a different approach to measurement. If a company is using a different measurement method, there's a transition relief to use the same method in the first year of applying the standard. Further, what needs to be disclosed, it's also whether and how the company is using an internal price on carbon pricing for decision making, and whether and how executive remuneration is linked to a climate change. And then again, I will pass to Jan, and we'll look at how banks and what banks should be considering here. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks a lot, Robert. So the next slide here, I'm going to cover 2 slides about financed emissions. So I previously already saw some questions about whether we need to disclose finance emissions, whether even if we don't have a transition plan or a net zero target, and I believe the answer is yes. And why is that so? Because S2 actually mentions that financial institutions should disclose their Scope 3 emissions in accordance with Category 15 of Scope 3 emissions as defined by the GHG Protocol. So the GHG Protocol is aligned with the PCAF standards, so the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. In other words, understanding the PCAF standards, who actually developed a list of metrics to help banks disclose and measure and disclose their finance emissions, will support financial institutions' compliance to IFRS S2 concerning the measurement of finance emissions. But just before I dive into the PCAF standards, I just wanted to highlight that I think there were a couple of transition relief that the ISSB announced earlier this year. So I believe the ISSB has tentatively decided to propose to amend IFRS S2, to permit entities to exclude Scope 3 Category 15 emissions associated with derivatives. So not the entire Scope 3, not the entire Category 15 or finance emissions, but only those associated with derivatives. And so if an entity is required if an entity is required by jurisdictional authority, stock exchange on which it is listed, to use a method other than the GHG Protocol or PCAF standards to measure the greenhouse gas emissions, the entity would then also be permitted to use that method other than the GHG Protocol or PCAF. Regardless, in most cases, the GHG Protocol and the PCAF standards, which is aligned with the protocol itself, would still be essential for finance emissions measurement and relevant disclosures as well. So a bit more on the context. PCAF, what is that? That's a financial industry-led initiative dedicated to helping financial institutions assess and disclose their greenhouse emissions from their loans and investments through GHG accounting. And finance emissions, according to PCAF, is defined as the absolute emissions that banks and investors finance through their loans and investments. So in other words, emissions attributed to a financial institution's lending, financing activity, expressed in tons of CO2 equivalent. But the list of other intensity metrics, like by economic intensity, dividing absolute per, let's say, by per euro or US dollars, invested or Hong Kong dollars invested is also considered useful by PCAPs, since they help financial institutions compare different portfolios or parts of portfolio, as well as their emissions performance for managing climate risks. So we might also want to look at why do we even want to measure finance emissions. So the financed emission standard developed by PCAF provide really detailed methodology guidance for 7 specific asset classes. That was actually, why do we want to excuse me, sorry, I was a bit far ahead. So why do we want to measure finance emissions? It's because it enables transparent climate disclosures. It also helps a bank identify where transition-related climate risk and opportunities may lie. It also helps inform emissions reductions on net zero target setting and transition planning. So essentially, through doing the exercise of calculating your finance emissions, different parts of the portfolio, you're able to identify which particular area you would want to focus on, prioritize addressing in order to reach your interim or longer term emissions reductions targets. And the PCAF standards currently provide a list of metrics specific for 7 specific asset classes, including, so these have all been summarized on the slide here. So that would include like listed equity, project finance, and mortgages, commercial real estate, so on and so forth. So I'll not go through each of those in detail here because already on the slide. I will already move on to the next one, which is just very briefly an example of how finance emissions can be disclosed. So as I've mentioned before, HSBC intends to go net zero by 2050, and that net zero goal, of course, includes reductions and of their finance emissions. And this slide here just shows how this bank has disclosed their current finance emissions by using the metrics provided by PCAF. So using these metrics of formula from PCAF, as shown on previous slide on different asset classes, the bank is able to identify a few key sectors where they have observed significant financed emissions. So that would be energy, transport, and others, as shown on the left-hand side here. The gray column in the slide here shows the metrics they've used and how the finance emissions compare to or may affect the bank's net zero transition. Then complementary to that key transition, technologies and strategies which have been identified on the right-hand side with red dots on the figure, showing possible projects that the bank can leverage to reduce their financed emissions. So I hope this sheds some light on what finance emissions are, how to disclose that. And with that, I will hand over to Lois.
Yes, thank you very much, Jan. Thank you for those explanations. We're now going to look at another section of our Align module. We've covered all the core content areas of disclosure that meet ISSB standards now and that conform with the baseline. However, as all of you are aware, there are often also regulatory requirements and other additional disclosures that companies need to consider, either because they have to or because they want to. And so we're going to cover that in this part of the section. So how do you build on the baseline? We've already talked about this a bit at the beginning of the training today, but the point is that if companies have to or choose to adopt the IFRS standards, then they must comply with them. But there may be additional disclosures that they want to or have to make based on factors such as jurisdictional requirements, stock exchange regulations, industry norms, and things like that. So listed and non-listed companies might have to comply with jurisdiction-specific disclosure requirements. They might also apply to companies in your supply chains or companies who are procuring services and goods from you. There might be disclosures required to satisfy policy objectives, including those aimed at promoting sustainability. So it might be information to support things like offers of incentives or tax cuts for sustainable practices. Companies might also want to or have to provide additional disclosures to align with emerging industry practices and to effectively manage sustainability-related risks and opportunities for their sector. And of course, companies might identify other stakeholders and their need for information and want to make disclosures accordingly. So in your handout, you'll find some detailed slides on various different additional disclosures you may want to consider, such as using the ISSB with the integrated reporting framework, with the European sustainability reporting standards, or with the GRI standards. So you'll find all that in your homework, in your handout, I beg your pardon. But today we're focusing on banks. So I'm going to leave you to review the handout in your own time and pass to Jan to discuss some disclosure requirements specific to the banking sector, or considerations for the banking sector. Over to you, Jan.
Thanks a lot, Lewis. So this slide here is, is that too far away? Yes. So this slide here is on Basel III disclosures. Actually, climate-related disclosures are, well, important, and now it's a part of the Basel III framework. So the context was the latest update in June. The Basel III has already published their proposed framework on voluntary disclosures of climate-related financial risk. And the context before this happened was that before this framework was released, previously existing Pillar 3 Basel disclosure rules that did not require such climate-specific disclosures. But then in November 2023, the Basel Committee published a consultative document proposing new Pillar 3 climate risk disclosures. So that covers both qualitative areas such as governance, strategy, risk management, and concentration risks, as well as quantitative information such as sector exposures, finance emissions, and indicators of physical and transition risk. So this work was kind of concluded in June 2025 with the release of a framework for the voluntary disclosure of climate-related financial risk. So this final framework is designed to operate within the Pillar 3 disclosures and to complement IFRS S1 and S2, but quite importantly, it's voluntary. So at the end of the day, jurisdictions have to decide whether and how they want to adopt this. So the final version of this framework, I just wanted to highlight a few key points here, retains some key qualitative disclosures and quantitative templates, but it also introduces more flexibility than when it was first proposed back in 2023. So if you want to find out more about this particular new document, just want to say that there are already templates on facilitated emissions. Excuse me, there were templates on facilitated emissions included back in when they came up with the proposal back in 2023, but this one has been removed. But there are other templates on like scenario analysis and how you can use that for climate-related disclosures. So you can look out on that. That could be quite useful. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to cover here, and just want to highlight that this particular disclosure framework also covers bank-specific metrics. So examples would be quantitative climate exposures by credit quality of loans, and they also are looking into forward-looking data as well. So scenario analysis and stress testing would be an important aspect for disclosures in this particular framework. Then I'll hand over to Fiona.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jan. And that brings us to the end almost of our second module. So just to round things off, we have a final poll question on this section before we do another quick exercise to wrap this section up. So our poll question here is to get a sense of what is it that your disclosure objectives should consider. Should they consider the ISSB standards only, the ISSB standards and regulatory requirements, just regulatory requirements, or the ISSB standards, regulatory requirements, and other sources of guidance? So I'll give you a moment, but I can see a fair amount of consistency in the answers you're giving here. So I think you maybe all know the answer to this one. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds before we show the poll result. Great. Okay, let's end the poll there because I think we see a very consistent response. Indeed, the vast majority of you here got this one right. The bottom answer is, of course, the correct approach. So it's important to take a balanced, kind of holistic approach in setting out our disclosure objectives here and aim to balance between alignment with the standards, making sure that you've considered what's applicable within your regulatory context, and of course, using other sources of guidance, such as the ones that Jan's talked us through there, where they're relevant to do so as well. Great, thanks everyone. So this brings us now to our next Menti exercise. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a reflection here on what we've heard in this Align module. So in Align, we walked through each of those 4 core content areas of the ISSB standards, and we talked about, particularly in relation to governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets, what it is that you need to disclose and implement. And we also shared some examples of what that can look like for certain companies in the banking sector. So that's probably sparked in your mind quite a lot of thoughts about maybe what might be missing from your current disclosure practices. And so, of course, what we'd recommend that you do as part of your alignment activities is to conduct a full gap assessment to identify particularly what those gaps are, prioritize those gaps that you think are most important to address in order to meet the reporting requirements, and to overall kind of aim to plan for maybe the new skill sets, resources, processes that you might need to develop or adapt to meet the disclosure objectives. So we won't be able to go through the depth of a gap analysis today, but what we'd like to do is just take a quick reflection. Maybe there's something that's front of mind from what you've heard in today's presentation in terms of either a disclosure content area or a particular internal process that you think you might need to develop. So feel free to share with us via the Menti what that is for your organization. So I've reshared the link a few messages above again to Menti, but it's the same as before. So hopefully most of you have that open, and I'll just take a quick look now in Menti and share my screen so you can see the answers. Okay, thanks everyone already who's shared in this. That's great. So what are we seeing so far? So someone has mentioned that they need better data quality, stronger risk integration, and clearer alignment with standards, and improving their internal controls. So yeah, building out that consistency and reliability, as you said. I think that's often something we hear from organizations, is maybe that they have some of this information already, maybe they have some processes in place, but as we're moving towards an approach that's much closer to financial accounting here, the need to build a more robust approach with clear controls around it is quite an important point. A few more mentions of data I see in here, which is a common point of the need for measuring your emissions and the GHG counting side of things. So hopefully some of what Jan talked us through there in terms of the PCAF methodology can be a useful signpost there to help you build out your methods for finance emissions. But we know, particularly for banks, this can be a very challenging topic. And of course, as with everything, it's all about, materiality. So focusing on, understanding your most material emission sources, maybe the highest emissions intensity activities within your portfolio first, and, aiming to build up data quality over time, moving perhaps from estimates to start with towards actual data where you're able to. Okay, I see a few people mentioning scenario analysis and target setting as well. Indeed, obviously, in the banking sector, obviously something where there are some well-developed examples and methods, but also, quite a complex process to undertake. So again, thinking about how you can maybe start out with scenario analysis and do something at a high level that enables you to understand your hotspots within your portfolio that you can then build out further methodologies and analysis for over time can be helpful. So someone also has mentioned about the need for training. So yeah, maybe, and someone said skill sets as well. So maybe you need to build in more training for your colleagues to help adapt the right kind of skill sets to enable you to take this forward. So hopefully today's training can be a good start for that. And we'll signpost some more capacity building resources at the end of the training as well that can help here. Great, lots of good responses. I'd love to spend longer going through them all, but in the interest of time, I'll leave this open, of course, so that you can review those. But I think great to get your reflections immediately on what front of mind. And of course, it's very understandable that there will be gaps and that these are things that will be things you need to address, perhaps over multiple disclosure cycles. But what we'd encourage you to do is to take this away and to do a fuller gap assessment. We have a link in the handout to the SSE's gap analysis checklist as well that can support you here. But overall, probably it's about thinking how you can prioritize those gaps. So thinking about maybe what's most significant to address before your first disclosures, and perhaps there are maybe other activities that could be improved and evolved over time as your reporting matures. Hey. So I'll just reshare the slide presentation now, and this will get us started on our third of 4 modules. So module 2 there is quite a large one, I should say. So we're well more than halfway through our time together, don't worry, but lots to cover in that module, which hopefully was quite helpful. So now we've talked a bit about the content required for disclosure, we're going to be looking a little bit more practically in module 3 at how this is done. So starting with the practices and processes to collect appropriate data for disclosure, which I think hopefully will speak to that gap that a number of you have mentioned wanting to address there. So our 3 key areas we're going to be covering here around how to identify information and then thinking about how to evaluate and integrate it. So to get us started with the identify side of things, I'm going to hand back over to Jan, who'll be able to share a little bit more about the work from the UNEP FI Climate Risk Centre that might be able to support you here.
Thanks a lot, Fiona. So as Arjun mentioned earlier, right in the opening remarks, at the Risk Centre, UNEP FI Risk Centre, we are running 6 projects or groups to help financial institutions better identify, assess, manage, and report on their sustainability-related risk, including those from climate. And 2 of these groups or projects focus directly on disclosures. And in the next few slides, just 2 of them, I'm going to briefly walk through what they do and what problems they aim to address. So on this slide here is our core Risk Centre Disclosure Initiative or group, and this one is called Enhancing Environmental Risk Reporting and Disclosure Practices. So this project actually builds upon our 2024 work, where we identified some persistent disclosure gaps, especially concerning the connection between sustainability factors with financial metrics, also gaps in sectoral specific disclosures. So if you're interested in that research, we have actually published the findings in our sustainability disclosure landscape report in August. So feel free to check it out. But going back to the group that we're having this year, we all know that the disclosure landscape is evolving really quickly, with new and updated requirements emerging across different jurisdictions. But then despite these developments, a lot of banks actually still would describe their own or their peers, this risk management for sustainability related and climate related aspects as kind of something like work in progress. And that's exactly what our project aims to address. So this project or group supports banks by providing practical tools, peer exchange, and direct access to subject matter experts. So the project is structured through a few major components. So we have intro sessions that would be covering on regulatory landscape, as well as some more nascent field of sustainability related reporting, such as those on nature and social related aspects. Then we're also going to have quite a number of technical sessions diving into the key topics that you can see on the screen. So linking sustainability with financial metrics, that would include a few sessions on linking climate with financials, linking nature and social with financials. Then there are also industry-specific disclosure sessions, environmental resilience assessment and reporting, and finally a session on preparing for sustainability-related reporting assurance. So each of the sessions will feature guest speakers who can be coming from disclosure standard setters. They could be risk practitioners, they could be solutions providers, and also among peer institutions just want to share their experience. And another key element is that we are looking to develop a disclosure toolkit. Right now it's called the Sustainability Disclosure Readiness Indicators. This will be shaped by the feedback and needs of our group participants. And this particular tool will include both compliance readiness indicators and fair representation indicators, which would be built around principles that are commonly found across major disclosure standards and expectations of high quality reporting. And this whole toolkit will be supported by an anonymized self-assessment survey that we plan to open to companies across all sectors, which will then hopefully allow us to generate cross-industry insights on, what could be common disclosure challenges, where data allows, also provide within industry or cross-industry benchmarking. And ultimately, this project just aims to help our members and partners strengthen their own reporting and disclosure practices, which we can, viewing disclosures more than just a box-taking compliance exercise, but also as an opportunity to produce risk-informed, decision-useful information that can hopefully turn into competitive advantage for the bank. Then another project that haven't kickstarted but will start early next year will be on assessing client transition plan. I saw earlier questions about how do you even assess the credibility of your client transition plan, and this is actually quite a niche area that we want to focus on, to really help banks integrate transition plan assessment for their clients' transition plans more effectively into their own sustainability risk management processes. So this project is built upon an existing framework. If you haven't heard of that already, there is this framework called Assessing Client Transition Plan Guidance and Framework, which is developed by the World Benchmarking Alliance. So it's currently, maybe I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, it's the only framework that focuses specifically on evaluating the credibility of client transition plan. And while many banks are already reviewing their client transition plans, the real challenge now is, what could be some possible metrics, or what could be the right questions that I should be asking my clients in order to help me assess whether the information provided is credible? And how do you turn the results of these assessments or client engagement into practical risk relevant decision making? And this is where I hope this project will add value. So what you can see on this slide is just a preview of the Risk Center's 5-step sustainability risk integration framework that is not specific to this project, but something that will be a core backbone of what connects all of these different projects together. So I'm just showing how this framework aligns with this particular project on assessing client transition plan here. So our objective is to demonstrate how transition plan assessment findings can strengthen each step of the risk integration processes. So looking into first, identify risk. So we will be looking into key indicators and using key indicators of what we can look at to judge early on when we are onboarding a client, when we're doing client screening or onboarding due diligence, what could be some red flag checklist that we want to be looking out for. Then we want to be looking at the second stage, assess. Assess is actually just assessing materiality. So how does that information help us establish the threshold that would guide client engagement, also counterparty level assessment? Then measure risk. How do we translate the transition plan assessment outcomes into things such as credit risk decisioning? And then mitigate risk is about identifying the transition finance offerings that could support credible transition pathways. And finally, monitor and report. So that would be supporting effective client engagement, ongoing due diligence, and also transparent reporting. That central components I've mentioned before is how we are applying this ATP Co framework, assessing client transition plans. That's ATP Co. Apologies for the sudden acronym here. So they do have a 4-step assessment that would include compliance check. And in this case, they haven't come up with specific metrics there yet. So to supplement this particular step, we will be looking into the disclosure readiness indicators tool that I've just mentioned for this step. Then we're going to also have a red flag check, granularity check, and credibility check. So the session will feature key speakers who actually developed this ATP code framework. So they will be telling you what they, what's the background, how do you implement that, and there will be case studies and exercises on how you can implement these metrics and link it back to your risk assessment or management processes. So essentially, this project aims to provide a structured and consistent method for assessing your client's transition plan across key elements, which is also complementary with the TPT framework, which is also essential for your ISSB disclosures if you have a transition plan. So it will be covering elements including strategic ambition, targets, implementation strategy, engagement strategy, and governance. So the exact 5 elements from the TPT framework. And throughout this project, apart from what the experts are saying, what the experts from the ATP code or WBA are saying, you'll be also able to tap into peer exchange opportunities. So there will be project participants who will hopefully share, where the common challenges are, what could be emerging practices that we could all benefit from, and how do you build alignment on transition plan assessment approaches so that you can better take that outcome and so that it becomes a part of how you integrate sustainability risk and opportunities into your own enterprise risk management. Then the third slide here, like the final slide on our pitch. So it's on, if you're interested in what I've just mentioned, the previous projects, you can check out our website. You can also directly email us. I'll not read the benefits here or explain the fee structures. If you're interested, please do check it out. I just want to mention that although some of the project, like the disclosures project, has already kicked off, we just kicked off in the end of October and have run 2 sessions already, but you will have full access to all of these research projects, including previous webinar recordings, all the slide decks, and you will be able to still tap into this expert network. And with that, I will actually, this to me. Should I hand over to Fiona?
Sure. Yeah, I think most of the content here carries on with you, but just to introduce this next section briefly. So we covered there, of course, how to identify the risks and opportunities. And now once we've identified them, of course, we then need to evaluate the financial effects of those risks and opportunities. So we know this can be quite a daunting part of the process. So back over to you, Jan, for a few of the key concepts here. And I will just flag we're a little over time. So if you could aim to be as brief as you can, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, and the next slide will be on briefly on the approach to materiality. There are different approaches. So materiality, as Robert has already explained, is a fundamental concept that is relevant for sustainability related disclosures. And this slide here just showcases different approaches or perspective on materiality. So the ISSB approach is something that focuses on financial materiality. So what you can see here would be, disclosures on how these sustainability related risks and opportunities could reasonably expected to affect my own company's financial prospects. That would be financial materiality, essentially. Then double materiality means that companies should consider also their sustainability-related impacts. So how they are impacting the environment and the people through the offerings of their products and services. And that double materiality, that's impact materiality, excuse me. So double materiality would be logically just considering both aspects. And this double materiality aspect is what the EU approach, so for the ESRS disclosure is. Then move on to the next slide. So this is a useful resource for your ISSB disclosures. So someone also asked previously about how do you use SASB standards? And I would essentially think that it's most relevant to materiality assessment. So the SASB standards offers likely material topics to up to specific to 77 industries. So you can check out what are the likely financial and material topics and metrics that could be applicable to particular industries. That could be really helpful for your S1 and S2 disclosures. Then very briefly on the 2 examples on materiality assessment. And this slide here is an example from UBS. So we can see that climate risk, which has been shown in like grayish gold, including physical climate risk and other transition risk like D3, policy, and the others, how these can be material as they drive and contribute to actual and potential effects on the bank's financial standing through affecting the traditional risk types. So we can see that a risk rating is applied here, shown on the y-axis of the matrix, which covers all business divisions and products and services offered within them. The bank first evaluates the inherent risk at the product or service level, so defining pre-mitigant risk. And then it also looks at climate risk drivers that may result in effects of the bank or its own client investee assets. And they also decompose that to articulate the transmission channels from which these effects on the financials may arise. So a few examples on the transmission channel value chain. So it would include, like I said, climate risk driver. These could be policies or changes in technology. And then, of course, what the transmission impact could be changes in income, what a channel is. So is it through a counterparty, is it through a particular asset, or is it directly to the bank itself? Then it will look at the impact driver. So example metrics here would be creditworthiness and probability of default, for example. And then they look at how these climate risk would translate into changes in traditional risk category across both the financial and non-financial categories as well. Then, for example, climate transition risk may result in credit risk are decomposed to examine how changes in global climate policies, low carbon technologies or changing customer sentiment may affect either the creditworthiness of the bank's counterparties or affect the value of collateral that they may hold against existing credit facilities. So in summary, the risk rating y-axis considers inherent risk, climate risk transmission, and then the risk amplifier, because we want to be looking also at the macroeconomic feedback loops. Then on the x-axis, there's time horizon of when these climate risk drivers and their effects on the financials and non-financials may materialize. Then the next slide is another. So apart from the matrix, a lot of banks are also using this table format to disclose the result of their materiality assessment. This one is from a bank based in Turkey, from Guarantee BBVA. They actually indicated in their report that they are using IFRS S1 and S2 for the disclosure. So you may want to look into that if you want to find out more about S1 and S2 specific disclosures. So essentially, just interesting to note here is that apart from IFRS S1 and S2, they also use the ESRS, so the EU Sustainability Reporting Framework, and they are able to, do the materiality assessment disclosures by applying to both sets of S1, S2, as well as ESRS, and even though there may be different perspectives on materiality assessment. So essentially, they look at the level of impact, so it could be negative, positive, the risk, and the opportunity. So whether that sustainability matter is a risk, is it an opportunity, or is it a negative or positive impact? And then how did they do that? First, they identified a list of potential topics that may be material by looking at their own strategic priorities. They also looked at global trends, stakeholder expectations, then also some of the resources listed on the right-hand side here. Then second, they identified and defined impacts, risk, opportunities under each topic. And then they evaluate the impacts, risk, and opportunities identified under each topic using a scoring method that rated the impact and financial materiality of each of these topics or sustainability related matter. The scoring approach combined internal methodologies such as, for example, climate risk assessment with internal and external stakeholder consultations. Then after that, they have the score for each impact or risk and opportunity. It's actually the next slide here. Yeah. And after that, they have a score for each impact, risk, and opportunity. And then some of the variables they have included for financial materiality would include something like probability and magnitude of the financial effects of the risk and opportunities in short term. In that definition, they've used less than 3 years for short term, 3 to 5 years for medium term, and longer than 5 years for long term. So I can just talk a little bit more about the financial materiality assessment of climate risk. So this bank defines what could be risk events that could have a significant financial effect on itself by considering both transition and physical climate risk, by analyzing which sectors are most exposed to in terms of transition risk, and which geographical regions may be most vulnerable to physical risk, for example. And then they look at their portfolios for sensitivity analysis. And after that, they concluded, for example, providing loans to customers unable to adapt to new regulations and changing market conditions during the transition to a low-carbon economy could negatively impact the bank's revenues and portfolio quality. So that they've concluded as a potential risk that may materialize in the long term, for example. Yeah, I think I wanted to be brief, and if there is any questions specific to these examples, let me know. But then other than that, I'll hand over back to the SSE colleagues.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. Now, as we're a little bit short of time, I'm going to go through this next section fairly quickly, but it is an important one because it's about practicalities. It's about what sort of processes you might need to develop or adapt in order to conform with sustainability disclosure requirements in the ISSB standards. So the good news is you're likely to have some systems and processes already in place in your organization that can be very helpful as you consider how to prepare information for ISSB disclosures. So we've already covered some of these. I'll go through them quickly. You might want to do a gap analysis to check for gaps in your existing systems and processes. You might want to look at how suitable they are and what prioritization criteria are currently used and whether and to what extent they are equally applicable to sustainability related risks and opportunities. If prioritization criteria are just probability and likelihood, because of the particular characteristics of sustainability related risks and opportunities, you might want to extend these criteria to impact vulnerability and speed of onset. Similarly, have a look at the company's controls frameworks to see how they can help. Importantly, you want to think about who you're going to liaise with, which people, which departments have already relevant processes and expertise that they can contribute to sustainability disclosure. They might be internal or external. And what are the interconnections between internal and external factors that need to be incorporated into your processes? Of course, sustainability related risks and opportunities are uncertain, both in terms of their impacts and the time at which they will manifest. And therefore, your processes should be adapted to take account of how management will deal with those uncertainties. And finally, you'll need to think about what resources are in place to manage existing or develop new systems and processes. Do you need to apply for more budget or go through a change management process? Now, because of all of these questions, and the ones you've raised in your Q&As, we recommend completing the homework, which is to develop a disclosure plan. As we said above, this is not mandatory, But a disclosure plan is like an internal document, a standalone strategy or part of your wider disclosure strategy that enables you to take control of your own narrative about your company's story and your company's actions. It will support internal collaboration, knowledge sharing, and cross-functional team discussions by identifying who should be consulted, what systems they have, how they're going to work together in terms of committees and or similar. But importantly, this disclosure plan works as a central reference point, an audit trail, explaining how your disclosures have been prepared, where and how judgments have been made, what sign-off processes you have, and so on and so forth. So do have a look at the homework. Now, I think in the interest of time, we're going to hand over directly to our colleague Vanessa, who's going to take us through module 4 of this training session. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Louis. So hello, everyone. I'm Vanessa. So we are now moving on to the last unit of this training, which focuses on the when and where of disclosure of sustainability-related financial information. As with the last unit, we will have like 3 main sessions. To get us started, we will look at the location and timing first. In this session, we are looking to clarify where disclosure on sustainability-related information should appear and the frequency and the timing of the disclosure. The requirements in ISSB standards about what information to report are based on existing sustainability reporting regimes, focus on investor information needs and on aspects of financial accounting standards. ISSB and GRI reporting standards, they share the same content requirements, such as what to report. However, ISSB standards are focused on investors' information needs and decision making. In particular, information about risks and opportunities that could affect a company's financial prospects. Both organizations take different approaches to defining materiality, but they are not competing. The GII approach is set out and understood among sustainability practitioners, whereas the IFRS approach is familiar to accountants and relies heavily on management judgments. Yes, there are some of the impacts identified as material may also create sustainability risks, which could be so significant that they are important to disclose to the investors. Furthermore, let's take a look at what is material information. Given that we hear different references to types of materiality with different reporting standards and frameworks, let's briefly review here what we mean by material information for the IFRS S1 and S2. So in IFRS S1 and S2, we define the material information is that information is material when it influences the decisions of primary users of general purpose financial reports and informs their decisions about, such as providing resources to the company. Secondly, buying and selling or holding equity and debt instruments. And thirdly, loans and other forms of credit. And lastly, voting on or otherwise influencing management's actions that affect the use of the company's economic resources. And also consider the characteristics of the investors and the company's own circumstances. Different investors can have different and sometimes conflicting information needs. Sustainability-related financial disclosures are intended to meet the common information needs of investors. Now let's take a look at the further disclosing material information. So companies should ensure that material information is clearly identifiable and that you use the plain language. So companies shall also ensure that the material information is not randomly dispersed in your disclosure. And thirdly, the companies might also be required to make additional or non-material disclosures by the regulators in their jurisdiction, and any additional information shall be distinguished from the material information to which it relates. So let's take a quick sample to test your understanding when we talk about the disclosed information in when applying the ISSB standards. So actually, it tests your understanding of what we mean by material information. Oh, sorry, I can't see the sample. Weird. So sorry, I cannot stop the sample, but like the correct answer should be A and B. Yes. The answer will be A and B. So unless it has been determined that the particular values being specified are expected to have a financial effect on the company, this may not be information that is necessary. So moving on, let's talk about where to report for the ISSB. So the disclosure under the ISSB standards has to accompany the financial statements and be part of the same general purpose financial reporting package. However, IFRS S1 does not say where in that reporting package the information shall be provided. This is designed to allow jurisdiction-specific requirements on the location of reporting. The most important factor to consider here is to ensure that sustainability disclosures are provided as part of the same reporting package as the company's financial statements, which means the sustainability disclosures must be provided at the same time as the related financial statements, cover the same reporting period as the financial statements, and authorized by the same body or individual authorizing the financial statements. There is a research by the WBCSD on the states of integrated reporting. It shows that nearly 2/3 of the companies continue to put sustainability information in the standalone reports. However, the ISSB standards require material sustainability-related financial disclosures to be included with the general purpose financial reports. It suggests that many companies have some way to go to get their internal process and disclosures plans aligned. And let me hand over to Louis for the example.
Thanks, Vanessa. And rather than show you an example in this case, we're going to show you what Vanessa was referring to a moment ago, which is research from the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. It's from their 2025 Reporting Matters report. That's an annual review of corporate reporting from a selection of global companies. And what this shows is that at the top with the grey boxes here, sustainability reports that are standalone reports remain the predominant approach in 2025, comprising 54% of reports in this year's sample. They also tell us what of those standalone reports, the percentage that are combined or integrated. But you can see from the results from 2024 and 2023 that the shift towards standalone reports is declining, and perhaps this reflects the fact that many companies are now shifting towards reporting financial and non-financial information within the same document in line with mandatory requirements. You can see at the bottom that there is some difference across regions, for example. So in the Americas, standalone reports still predominate, and less so in Europe, and probably because of the introduction of legislation there, which would explain the decline in standalone reports. So just a snapshot really of where companies are reporting, but of course this presupposes that they're using PDFs and so on, but we know digital reporting is increasing, and that's what Vanessa is going to talk about next. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. So as we all know, like technology is emerging this consideration of the disclosures. So increasingly, corporate reporting is moving from PDF reports towards information on web pages with structured data sets, such as those databases offered by the stock exchanges. There is a digital taxonomy provides the common elements or text needed to make your sustainability disclosures machine readable. This makes it easier to take large data sets, like information from an entire industry, and bring them all together to analyze them. The ISSB taxonomy reflects the requirements and complying materials of the ISSB standards. Actually, digital reporting has a number of benefits. Firstly, it makes the reported information easier to use for analysis. Data is structured the same across business in a machine-readable format. And secondly, tagging information potentially allows for automatic checks for the quality and consistency. And thirdly, more and more data connection and management systems are compatible with digital reporting taxonomies, which improves processing and report preparation. And lastly, text can have labels and descriptions in multiple languages. So if you report your quantitative data in one language, someone speaking another language can also understand what it means. So moving on, let's talk about the next unit of the communication. So following the discussion on location and timing, let's now think about ensuring efficient disclosures. So we added this to the training because a common comment we find from the companies is that there is a growing reporting burden. What we hope to highlight here is that when done correctly, efficiencies can be made to reduce the burden. So first of all, it's important to understand what effective information, what effective communication looks like, and what is required. Often companies think that if they just put all the information they have into one report, that everyone will be satisfied. However, this will be against the core concepts, in particular fair presentation. As we spoken earlier, S1 requires information to be clear and concise. And also the clearest form disclosure will depend on the nature of the information. For example, tables, graphs, diagrams, and also accompanying text. And thirdly, to be concise, disclosures need to avoid boilerplate information, unnecessary duplication of information, and to use clear language. So some preparers watching today might be thinking of themselves that they still don't see what all this information about. Perhaps their experience focuses on standard non-sustainability reports, or they haven't had much interaction with the external or internal audit. So to the accountants watching, I just want to remind you all to be kind to your colleagues. Help them understand the differences in rigor that's required in data collection, systems oversight and sign-off for annual reports. The ISSB standards require that disclosed information shall be material, connected and aggregated or disaggregated. This information shall also include comparative information and be restated as necessary. So companies shall avoid unnecessary duplication and cross-reference appropriately. And next, we're going to talk about cross-referencing. So as you may already notice, there may appear to some overlap in the topics, and thus shall be addressed in the disclosure. For example, you might have the same governance approach for all sustainability issues. Rather than duplicate certain information, you can use cross-referencing to enhance efficiency of your disclosures. Cross-referencing should be applied consistently and transparently. It shall not result in the information becoming more difficult to understand. And now let me hand over to Louis to talk about an example.
Sorry, I had a computer freeze there for a moment. Yes, this example is a very simple one. It's from ArcelorMittal's 2024 sustainability report. And down the left-hand side, you'll see that they list content elements with which you are now very familiar because we've been talking about them today: organizational overview, governance, business model, risks and opportunities, and so on. So they tell us in the left-hand column, these are the things that we're dealing with in our reports. And on the right-hand column, you see where they refer the reader to. So they cross-refer to the part of their disclosures, plural, that you can find information in. So in some cases, like in business model, they refer you to information within the sustainability report. In other cases, they refer you to information outside the sustainability report. So for example, under strategy and resource allocation, we can see that they refer us both to parts of the 2024 sustainability report, but also further information in the annual report and Form 20F. So a simple example about cross-referencing and the way one company does it. Back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Louis. And finally, here we are. We have moving on to the last section of our last unit. So the last section of our last unit will share with you how you can ensure that the users of financial reports have confidence in the data you're disclosing. As we may all know, the trust is an essential component of sustainability-related disclosures. And we know that there are increasingly concern about the growing concern of greenwashing. There's a very key trust builder to strengthen strengthen the confidence from the investors, is that we show the data and trends over time. So the comparative information provides context. It helps to indicate progress and underpin strategy and risk management. So this information can be qualitative and quantitative. And also, errors should be restated. So companies can sometimes express concerns when sharing information that they deem to be sensitive, or they worry about if shared information could deplete to reduce their competitive advantage. So these standards relieve an entity from disclosing information about a sustainability-related opportunity if that information is commercially sensitive. So if there is a concern you may have, there is a further detail you can read in the handouts. So finally, it's important to build confidence by providing clear statements of compliance. A company that complies with all requirements in the ISSB standards, even the reliefs, is required to make it explicit to make a statement of compliance. We have published a new guidance called IFRS Foundation, called Companies as Investors Call for Voluntary Application of ISSB Standards. So you may have a further take a look. Before handing over to Fiona, there were a few things to remember. Firstly, really to work through the list. And secondly, you can find in the handout, there is an additional slide in this section with reminders of how to report effectively. And I strongly recommend all of you guys to take a look. So now let me hand over to Fiona to the wrap up.
Great, thank you so much for that, Vanessa. So that brings us then to the end of our fourth module of the training. So congratulations everyone who's still with us here. We've covered the main substance of our training content today, and we'll be taking a bit of time now to wrap up together with a final exercise and reflect on some resources that you can take away to support your learning journey. So to wrap up, we have time for a last exercise in Menti together. So you'll have seen the link again in Menti there. So if you want to jump back into Menti, we can work through this one together. So we want to take a moment to think here. We've heard about some of the different techniques that you can use to improve your presentation within your reports, to think about how you can connect and integrate information into one report, and also how to help users to navigate the different information that you're required to disclose. So you may even have some more ideas than we've thought of or shared here on this topic. So we'd like to take a moment together just to share maybe feedback to everyone. Which techniques do you think are most helpful here? Which ones do you use or do you find most useful as a user of a report as well? And I think that's always interesting to see when a few of us are together what we think about that. Great, thank you everyone who's already shared with us there. So I'm seeing a few answers come in. I'll give the rest of you some time to have a little think, but people are mentioning using indexing and hyperlinking, cross-referencing again, categorizing and having a SMART technique. So yeah, maybe making sure if you're updating on each topic, applying that SMART of, is it specific, measurable, achievable, realistic? Oh, I've forgotten what the T is now. Target. Maybe it's about having the target. If I've got that wrong, let me know. But having that approach of structuring how you update on each topic, I think, can be very useful for sure. Clear terms of, table of contents, using tabs, using the integrated reporting approach, having categorization, using ChatGPT to search through the report. As a user, that's probably not a bad idea, is it? So using AI tools that can help you condense and summarize what's in a disclosure. It might also be an interesting exercise to see what an AI would summarize your disclosure as, and is it actually bringing out the right key messages that you would want to highlight? Because if its interpretation is different to yours, then maybe the emphasis in your disclosure may not be right. So that could be an interesting exercise. Oh, excuse me. We'll highlight that one there. So having a summary is useful as well, for sure, as that person highlighted. Not too long and waffly, exactly. So thinking as much as we can about conciseness. I think that, of course, is always the challenge here, because often when we're talking here about introducing new disclosure topics, it can sound like on the face of it, we're telling you to write a longer report. But of course, it's important to really use a strict materiality lens in your disclosure. Review what you're reporting against that materiality lens and really challenge yourself on, is that detail that you're putting in the report material to that investor audience and something that should be included? Great. So someone's mentioned also using infographics as well. That can be good to highlight key indicators, combining text with graphics, all kinds of great ideas here. Maybe using taxonomy, balancing that mix of quantitative and qualitative disclosure. Lots of great suggestions. Thanks, everyone. It's really good to get your input on this. And I think really shows we all, I think, intrinsically know what is helpful to our users. It's probably just challenging ourselves to keep that in mind and keep it front and center when we're preparing our reports. But of course, balancing that against what we have to do on a compliance basis can sometimes be the challenge. So I think that's where, as many of you have highlighted here, having content indexes and cross-referencing can be very useful tools to find that right balance there. Okay, perfect. So to wrap us up, we have to come back to that question that we started with at the beginning of the training session around the different tasks we were aiming to achieve today. So take a moment maybe to reflect now on where you think your understanding is at against those three areas of explaining the ISSB to your colleagues, on using the standards, and on developing a sustainability reporting strategy. Hopefully we'll see that things are a little bit improved, but of course it's good to be realistic about where you are. We won't have solved everything today in the one training session, but we'll wrap up in a second with some resources that can hopefully support you to continue. But thanks for those who've responded. I'm seeing certainly we're above the midway point on our comfort now, whereas we were in the twos before. So that's great to see, and thank you for sharing. Okay, let me take us back into the slide presentation. Feel free to keep responding on that in the background. And we have a few things to wrap up on to finish up the training session, including, of course, that all-important point on your training certificates. So make sure to stay tuned to hear about that. So one thing I mentioned at the start of the training is that there is an optional homework assignment that you can take forward if you'd like to continue your learning on this topic. So you can access the homework assignment from the event page for today's session, the same location where you found the handout for the slides. if you followed the links that we've shared with on that. You'll also find the homework. This homework is optional, it's not mandatory to complete it, and you don't need to submit it to us. But the focus of the homework is to put into practice what we've learned today. It's structured around those 4 core areas we talked about and the interactive exercises we've done together. And it's really focused on helping you to build that draft disclosure plan you can use to take forward the standards in your organisation. So encourage you to follow the link that Lois has shared there if you'd like to take a look at that. And of course, we know, as I said, there's a lot to learn on this topic. So a few resources we'd like to highlight for you here to help support your learning journey. So firstly, from the IFRS team, don't forget to make use of the IFRS Knowledge Hub. So this is a constantly updated resource with lots of new information, all of the guidance from the IFRS, a number of case studies and research publications are all available there. And as well, earlier this year, the IFRS team launched 4 free e-learning modules, which are CPD certified and are designed to help you support adoption of the ISSB standards. So you can use those to continue your learning journey or also share those with your colleagues as well. And then I see we've got Vladimir on camera now, and I'll hand over to you, Vlado, if you'd like to. Oh, apologies, sequencing wise, I forgot we had one more slide from Jan just to highlight some of the upcoming work from the UNEP FI Risk Centre. So a number of upcoming publications which Jan mentioned earlier in the session are just summarised here, and some of the key projects that she mentioned earlier as well. So be sure to check out the link in the slides for how to access more information from the UNEP FI Risk Centre as well. And thanks again, Jan. And apologies, next slide there is on the IFC front. So over to you for that, Vladimir. Unfortunately, Vladimir, you're frozen at the moment. We don't.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I will be very brief.
I hear you now. Yes, great.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. I think this was a very interesting session, and as you already know, our work on disclosure space has been very active especially in the past years, and we have we are very proud to launch the new e-learning course as one of the tools that we are now offering to the wider audience, and this forms a part of the wider sources that we are hoping to bring the topic of disclosure much closer to the emerging markets, and this is what stands our especially as one of our niche offerings, that we are able to be present in the emerging markets where disclosure practices are still in a, I would say, in embryo phase, and within that we are now and within the disclosure and transparency platform, we are now offering various tools of resources, which are now comprising of online platform, digital toolkit, e-learning, and the self-assessment tool, and now, as I said, the new e-learning course. And you, Fiona, personally have been involved previously in our benchmarking study that I'm personally very proud of, that provides basically a comprehensive benchmarking between our own disclosure and transparency framework against leading global sustainability reporting standards, some of them that were mentioned at today's session. Within that study, we hope and aim to bring closer the overall global disclosure baseline, which is now expanding, and we are all much closer to the overall interoperability. And through this study, which I will be sharing now in the chat, we hope to bring as said, the topic of disclosure much closer to the emerging markets where IFC has been traditionally more active, and of course to reduce the administrative burden of the disclosure reporting, which is now, I would say, topic number one, at least in Europe, where there is a huge push for simplification. And of course, there have been some backsliding, if I can call it that way, in Europe because of the possible voices of concerns regarding administrative costs. Through this study, we also hope to contribute to that cause as well in terms of helping companies reduce the administrative burden. And we have, through our study, aimed to leverage our own IFC aligned sustainability and governance practices to comply with ISSB and IFRS, which is which has more focus on Europe. And of course, to contribute to the practical guidance and hoping to prevent greenwashing and overall strengthen the reporting credibility. I think I will not take more of your time, and of course, the audience will be in a position to look more closely to the suite of offerings that I just mentioned. If they have any additional questions, we are there to provide clarifications.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Vladimir. And great to see that project come to fruition. And we've shared the link as well to the e-learning just released from IFC on sustainability reporting essentials as well. So please do check that out or access the links in the slide handout. So I know a few people have asked about timings. We're very close to the end of the session. So please just stay with us for the final few minutes if you can, and we'll wrap things up. So the SSE Toolkit, as I've mentioned before, is a program of resources you can access to support you further on this topic of the ISSB. So please do check that out in the slide handout. And I know this is probably the important point we're all still on the call for at the moment, is to hear about completion certificates. So a big bravo to all of you who've stuck with us for the full 3.5 hours of training. We know that this is a long time and there's a lot to learn. So we're very appreciative of all of the questions you've asked throughout the session and the interaction in the training. So as a thank you for that hard work, you can now receive your certificate for completion of the course. So the instructions to receive your certificate, you'll just see a message that Lois has just shared in the chat with you now, which provides the link to our feedback form. Of course, we'd love to have your feedback on the programme as well, so please do let us know through the survey any feedback that you have about the training. But if you complete that feedback survey, that is how we will send you your completion certificate at the email address you provide there. So if you fill that survey out, you'll receive your certificate from us within about a week of taking part. There's another opportunity to receive that link in that you'll get an email from Zoom 24 hours from today's session, providing you with the access to the link again. If you have any trouble accessing the link, please try copying and paste it into a different browser, just in case you're having an issue there. And make sure to check your junk folder for your certificate as well when it comes to it. I'll ask you as well just to share the link again, Lois, just in case anyone misses it, because the chat's moving along. But as I said, please check the email that you'll receive from Zoom tomorrow as well if you need that link. But you can reach out to the SSE team at the contact details in these slides if you have any issues after the session. So lastly, just to finish out with a final thank you. Firstly, a thank you to the SSE's official supporters, which is a group of stock exchanges and organisations committing to promoting sustainable capital markets and helping to make our training possible. And so finally, as well, of course, a big thank you to our partners who have made today's training possible, to the team at the IFRS Foundation, and in particular, Vanessa and Robert for joining us today, to the IFC team, including all of our colleagues who've joined us today, Carlos, Jana, Vladimir, and others as well. We really appreciate your support to make this opportunity possible. And of course, to the UNEP FI team, including Arjun and Jan, for their fantastic support for this programme as well. Last but not least, a big thank you to all of you who've joined us today as participants. We hope you've enjoyed today's training, and it's been fantastic to have you take part in the session with us. So lastly, I'll thank you all for joining us today and wish you a very happy rest of your day. So thanks again, everyone. Hope to see you again soon.